Yo, what's up everyone? It's Supreme Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Veela Delegation demanded Harry's presence at age 10 after blood test revealed he owns Veela Throne and 14 nations. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Blood Doesn't Lie. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Vernon Dudley would later describe to his neighbors as the worst Tuesday of his life, though he never told them why. Harry Potter didn't see the letter. He was in the garden, pulling weeds under a sky that couldn't decide between grey and blue, his knees dirt brown and his stomach making the particular hollow sound it made around 11 in the morning when breakfast had been half a piece of toast and he'd been outside since 7. He'd gotten good at ignoring it. The hollow sound, the ache behind his eyes, the way his hands sometimes shook a little when he hadn't eaten properly. You got good at ignoring things when ignoring them was the only option you had. He heard Aunt Petunia's sharp intake of breath through the open kitchen window. That wasn't unusual. Petunia had sharp intakes of breath for all sorts of things: a neighbor's new car that was slightly nicer than theirs, a magazine with a celebrity she disapproved of, a phone call from someone she'd rather not speak to. Harry had a whole catalog of Petunia sounds in his head, organized by threat level. This one was different. This one had a quality to it he'd never heard before. High and strangled, like something had physically reached into her chest and squeezed. He sat back on his heels and looked at the window. Vernon. Her voice came through the glass thin as paper. Vernon, come here. Now. Not come here, dear. Not the slightly irritated summons she used when he was watching football too loudly. The now at the end of it had no performance in it at all. It was just raw. Harry went back to pulling weeds. Whatever it wasn't going to be better for him if he looked curious. He heard Vernon's heavy footsteps cross the kitchen floor. Heard the crinkle of paper. A long silence. Then Vernon said, in a voice Harry had genuinely never heard him use, "What in the bloody hell is this?" It wasn't a question. It was the sound a man made when the ground moved under him. Harry pulled a dandelion out by its root and kept his face carefully neutral. The letter, as it turned out, was not a letter in the ordinary sense. It was a formal notice of visitation, written on paper that shimmered faintly gold at the edges and smelled, if you got close enough, like something between a thunderstorm and a flower garden. It bore 14 seals pressed in wax the color of sunlight, and at the top, in script so precise it looked carved rather than written, it read, "By authority of the Veela High Council and the sovereign blood right of the Aureate Throne, representatives of the 14 United Veela nations will attend the address of number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, on the morning of the third day following receipt of this notice, to formally claim and escort the recognized sovereign. Refusal to comply is not an available option under international magical law, Treaty 7 of the Accord of Living Skies, or any provision thereof. We suggest appropriate hospitality be prepared. We will not be long." At the bottom, in slightly smaller script, as though added as an afterthought, "The sovereign in question is the child Harry James Potter. Please ensure he is presentable." Vernon read it twice. Then he went and sat in his armchair in the sitting room, which he never did at 11 in the morning, and didn't say anything for a very long time. Petunia stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the wall. Harry came inside 20 minutes later to wash his hands and found both of them in that configuration and understood, with the instinct of a child who has survived by reading rooms, that something had fundamentally shifted. He dried his hands on the kitchen towel and said, carefully, "Is everything all right?" Petunia looked at him. It was the look she gave him sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention, quick, complicated, gone in an instant, some species of guilt or grief or something else entirely that she'd spent 10 years getting very good at hiding. "Go to your room," she said. "I haven't done anything, I know." She turned back to the wall. "Go to your room, Harry." He went. But he sat on the stairs rather than going all the way up, because the hollow sound his stomach made was louder when he was still, and also because he'd learned that the stairs, positioned just right, let you hear almost everything said in either the kitchen or the sitting room. He heard Vernon say, eventually, we could just, not be here. And go where, Vernon? They said refusal isn't an option. They said international magical law. It's not, they can't just come here and take the boy, he's not our boy. The words came out of Petunia flat and final and certain in a way that made something shift behind Harry's ribs. He never was. You know that. I know that. We were told to keep him. That's all we were ever doing. Keeping him. Silence. What does it mean? Vernon said. Sovereign. Throne. What does any of that, he's 10 years old, Petunia. I don't know what it means. Her voice had gone very tired. I never knew what any of it meant. Lily's world. I never understood Lily's world. Harry sat on the stairs with his arms around his knees and thought about the word sovereign, which he knew from a school project about the British monarchy, and thought about the word throne, and then thought about 14 wax seals and paper that smelled like thunderstorms, and he didn't sleep very well that night, but not because he was afraid. He was thinking. The morning of the third day arrived with the kind of aggressively normal weather that England produces as though to prove a point, overcast, mild, a light wind moving through the privet hedges. Number 4 looked exactly like numbers 2, 3, 5, and 6. The Dursleys had made sure of that always, with a commitment to normalcy so intense it had curdled over the years into something almost desperate. Harry was up at 6. He'd washed his face and put on the least oversized of Dudley's hand-me-down shirts, which was still large enough to make him look like a boy wearing a small tent. He'd tried to do something with his hair, which was its usual catastrophe, and had eventually given up. He ate the breakfast Petunia put in front of him, a full breakfast, which was unusual enough that Dudley had stared, without comment, and then he sat in the kitchen and waited. Vernon had put on his best suit. He kept adjusting his tie. Dudley had been sent to Mrs. Figg's the night before under some pretext, which Harry suspected had more to do with the Dursleys wanting him out of the way than any real concern for his well-being. At 8:45, the street went quiet in a way streets don't naturally go quiet. Not the absence of noise quiet of an early morning, but a deeper kind, like something large and attentive had turned its head. The birds stopped. The wind dropped. Even the light seemed to flatten slightly, the way it does before something interesting happens to it. Harry stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the front door and opened it before anyone knocked. There were 7 of them on the garden path. He'd had some image in his head, vague and uncertain, of what magical delegations looked like. Robes, maybe. Pointed hats. Something like the pictures in the books he wasn't supposed to have read at school but had read anyway, smuggled out of the library in his jumper. This was not that. The 7 people on the garden path were dressed in something that wasn't quite robes and wasn't quite ordinary clothing, layered things, whites and golds and deep amber, moving in a wind that wasn't blowing. They were all women, ranging in age from what looked like 30 to something that made the concept of age seem slightly irrelevant, and they were all beautiful in the specific unsettling way that stopped being about attractiveness and became about presence, the way a lit match in a dark room is beautiful, because your eye cannot do anything but go to it. The one at the front was tall, white-haired, and looked at Harry with the flat, assessing calm of someone who had evaluated many things over many years and had learned to withhold judgment until she had enough data. She had pale gold eyes. She was carrying a slim case of dark wood, about the size of a jewelry box, in both hands. She looked at Harry for a moment. Then she inclined her head, not a bow, precisely, but a distinct downward movement, deliberate and formal. "Harry Potter," she said. Her English was accented, French-flavored, precise. "I am Councillor Margot Therian, representing the High Council of the Veela Nations. We apologize for arriving in this manner." Her gaze moved briefly, without visible judgment, over the house, the garden, the aggressively trimmed hedges. It was unavoidable. Harry considered her. "You said in your letter that refusal wasn't an option," he said. "That's not really an apology situation, is it?" Behind him, he heard Vernon make a strangled sound. Something shifted in the counselor's pale eyes, not quite amusement, but its close relative. "No," she said. "I suppose it is not. May we come in?" "What's the blood test?" Harry said. "You mentioned a blood test in the letter." "You read the letter?" "My aunt and uncle read the letter. I listened through the stairs." He stepped back from the door. "Come in. I'll put the kettle on." They did not, in the end, do the blood test in the kitchen. Counselor Therian had looked around the kitchen with an expression that remained carefully neutral except for a brief moment when her gaze landed on the cupboard under the stairs and its small, neat lock, and something had moved through her face like weather, fast and gone, but Harry caught it. He was good at catching things people tried not to show. They moved to the sitting room, which Vernon had clearly tidied with aggressive anxiety that morning. Petunia sat on the edge of the sofa like someone prepared to bolt. Vernon stood by the mantelpiece with his arms crossed and his face the color of old putty. 3 of the 7 delegates remained outside. The other 4 arranged themselves around the sitting room with the quiet efficiency of people used to operating in uncomfortable spaces. The counselor set the dark wood case on the coffee table and opened it. Inside, on a bed of white fabric, was a shallow bowl of clear glass, a small crystalline vial of something that glowed faintly blue, and a slender needle in a case that looked like it was made of bone. "A blood test," Harry said, looking at it. "A heritage clarification ritual," Therian said. "What it will confirm, or, theoretically, deny, is whether the inherited magical signature of the Aureate line is present in your blood. The Aureate line is the sovereign lineage of the Veela Throne. It has not produced a living heir in over a century." She looked at him. "Blood tests do not lie, Mr. Potter. That is their entire value." "How did you even know to look at me?" Harry asked. "The throne itself called for the test." She said this like it was a perfectly ordinary sentence. "The Aureate Throne is a living magical construct. It recognizes its sovereign. 3 months ago, it sent a signal, a very old signal, one the Council had begun to believe it would never see in our lifetimes. We spent those 3 months tracing its source." A pause. "It traced to you." "I'm 10, Harry said. "Yes. And I'm a wizard." "I'm not," he gestured at the delegates, who were all still very, very present in the sitting room, "whatever you are. You are what your blood says you are, Mr. Potter." She held the needle case out to him. "May I?" He looked at it for a moment. Then he held out his left hand. It was quick, a small, precise sting at the pad of his index finger. She collected the single welling bead of blood with the edge of the glass bowl, which was already filled with about an inch of the blue glowing liquid from the vial. The blood hit the surface and sat there for a moment, a small dark point. Then it dissolved. And the blue liquid turned gold. Not gradually. Not a slow shift or a subtle tinge. It went from blue to gold between one breath and the next, solid and blazing and the color of sunlight through a window, and the bowl itself began to emit a low, resonant hum, like a large bell struck far away and still ringing. Everyone in the room was very still. The gold light moved across the ceiling of the Dursleys' sitting room, over Vernon's horse brasses and Petunia's framed prints and the family photo on the mantelpiece that didn't include Harry, and it was the most beautiful and alien thing the room had ever contained. Therian was looking at the bowl with an expression that was, Harry thought, the closest she'd probably come to open wonder in a long time. Then she looked at him. "The blood does not lie," she said quietly. "You are the sovereign of the Aureate Throne, Harry Potter. You hold the blood right to the crown of 14 Veela nations." Harry looked at the bowl. The golden light was still going. "Okay," he said. Petunia made a sound. Harry looked at her. Her face had done something complicated, a convulsion of emotions he couldn't fully name, moving through her features like the weather Therian's face had briefly shown earlier. Then she pressed her lips together and looked away. "What does this mean?" Vernon said. His voice was very controlled. He was doing the thing he did when he was most frightened, where he put on the voice he used with clients he needed to impress. "What does? You can't just come here and tell the boy he's some kind of king." "Not a king," Varian said, without looking at him. "A sovereign. The distinction matters." She looked at Harry. "It means, Mr. Potter, that you have a throne. It means 14 nations have been without leadership for a century and the magic of the throne itself has chosen you as its resolution. It means," she paused, and something in her voice shifted into honesty, "it means your life changes today. Substantially. We are here to begin that process." "You're taking him," Petunia said. Still not looking at Harry. "That's what you're saying." "With his consent," Varian said. "He's 10, Vernon said. He can't, under the Accord of Living Skies and Veela sovereign law, a recognized heir of the Aureate bloodline achieves full legal capacity for sovereign decisions at the moment of blood confirmation." Varian's voice did not change in volume or warmth, but it had acquired a quality that made Vernon take one short step back without seeming to realize he'd done it. "I am not here to argue with you, Mr. Dursley. I am here to ask Harry." She looked at Harry. He had been quiet for a minute and a half, he'd counted, roughly, because it was a useful habit when you needed to think, and in that minute and a half he had thought about the following things: the cupboard under the stairs and the lock on it, the hollow sound his stomach made at 11 in the morning, the way Petunia had said he's not our boy, he never was through the kitchen wall, the photo on the mantelpiece where he wasn't. He'd thought about school, where he managed to learn everything and have no friends because neither of those things were encouraged, and the way Dudley's gang had made a sport of cornering him for years with perfect parental permission. He'd thought about the bowl of golden light and the word sovereign and 14 wax seals on a piece of shimmering paper. "Yes," he said. Just the one word. No particular drama to it. Vernon started to say something. Harry looked at him, and something in that look, not anger, not defiance, just a very settled kind of calm, stopped the words before they got properly started. "I'll get my things," Harry said. There were not many things. A couple of school books, his secret library books that he'd been keeping in a hollowed-out space behind a loose brick in the garden wall, and a photograph of a woman with dark hair and green eyes that he'd found in the back of a school drawer when he was 7 and kept ever since because something about her face felt like a word he knew but couldn't say aloud. He fit them into a bag that had been Dudley's before Dudley outgrew it and was therefore slightly less awful than everything else he owned. He was downstairs in less than 5 minutes. Counselor Therian was waiting in the hall. The other 3 delegates were already outside. Petunia was standing at the kitchen door. She was looking at him with the complicated look she usually made disappear before he caught it, and this time she wasn't managing to make it disappear. Harry stopped in front of her. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, or if he wanted to say anything. He thought about 10 years of half rations and the cupboard and being told he was imagining things he demonstrably was not imagining, and he also thought about the occasional moment, rare, half-completed, quickly buried, when she'd looked at him and he'd thought he could see something else in there, underneath the performance of distance. "The woman in the photograph," he said. "In my room. That's my mum, isn't it?" Petunia looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. Very quietly. "That's Lily." "Okay," Harry said. He picked up his bag. He walked down the front path without looking back. The morning was still overcast, still mild, the privet hedge still aggressively trimmed. He walked through the gate and it swung shut behind him with a small, neat click that felt, in a way he couldn't have articulated at 10 years old but would think about later, like punctuation. The 7 delegates arranged themselves around him on the pavement. Therian fell into step on his left. None of them towered over him or hurted him or made him feel like he was being collected, which he'd half expected. They moved with him, which was different. "Where are we going?" he asked. "The Aureate Court," Therian said. "In the south of France, in the mountains above the Camargue." "You will feel a pull," she began. "I already feel it," Harry said. She looked at him quickly. "I've felt something for about 3 days," he said. "Like a sound I can almost hear." Is that the throne? A pause. Then, yes. Good, he said. At least that makes sense. They stopped at the end of the street. Tharian held out her hand, the palm up, formal. He looked at it, understood this was transportation of some kind, and took it. The other 6 formed a loose circle. The world folded, not like apparition, which Harry would learn later felt like being squeezed through a pipe, but like a piece of fabric being turned over, a smooth and enormous movement that happened around them rather than to them. Privet Drive disappeared. They arrived in light. Harry blinked, adjusting. The sky above him was a deeper, richer blue than Surrey had been, and the sun was higher and warmer, and ahead of him, the mountains of the Camargue rose in shades of silver and green into late morning. The air smelled like lavender and something older, something that preceded lavender and every other cultivated thing, ozone, stone, moving water. And below the mountain line, woven into the landscape in a way that made it look like it had grown there rather than been built, was the Aureate Court. He hadn't expected it to look like that. He'd expected something that looked like a castle, because that's what thrones usually lived in. The Aureate Court was not a castle. It was a structure that moved, slowly, very slightly, like breathing, its towers and arches rising and settling in shifts so gradual you might convince yourself it was just the wind. It was made of something that looked like pale stone but caught the light differently at different angles, moving through white to gold to almost amber and back again. The gates were open, enormous, worked in patterns Harry couldn't look at directly for too long because they seemed to have more edges than was strictly geometrically possible. There were people at the gates. Many people, he registered that at a distance, 40 or 50 at least, and as the delegation moved toward the court with Harry among them, he understood that they were waiting for him specifically, which was a very strange feeling for someone who had spent 10 years being firmly in the way. The word moved through the crowd before they'd even reached the gates, a wave, like wind through grass, people turning, shifting, heads coming up. He heard it ripple outward in French and in something older than French, a language he didn't know but somehow half recognized the rhythm of, and he realized, with a lurch of something between startlement and strange satisfaction, that the word was sovereign. At the gates, the crowd parted. He walked through it with Tharian on his left and the other delegates around him, and he kept his head up and his expression neutral because those were the 2 tools he had most practiced. A woman stepped forward from the gathered crowd. She was perhaps 40, dark-haired, with a quality of warmth that was so genuine it registered almost as a physical thing, like stepping into a patch of sunlight. She was beautiful in the same Veela sense that made it beside the point, but her eyes were crinkled at the corners with the kind of lines that come from actually smiling rather than performing it. Harry, she said, and his name in her mouth had a different quality than it usually had, not the flat Harry of the Dursleys, not the careful Mr. Potter of the Counselor, but something warm and direct. I am Apollon Delacour. I sit on the Council's advisory board. I am also, she smiled, probably the person who is going to explain the most things to you in the coming days, because Counselor Tharian is very good at formality and rather less good at making it comfortable. Is that fair, Margot? Entirely fair, Tharian said, and there was something in her voice that was almost, very nearly, humor. Come, Apollon said, turning toward the court. The Grand Matriarch will see you when you're ready, not before. You've had a large morning. Are you hungry? Harry, whose stomach had been making the hollow sound since about 8, said, yes. Actually. Good. She glanced at him sideways as they walked. What do you like? It occurred to him that he'd never been asked that before. Not as a serious question about actual preferences. He thought about it. I don't really know, he said honestly. I haven't had a lot of options. Apollon looked at him for one moment, and in that moment he saw the same weather cross her face that had crossed Tharian's at the sight of the lock on the cupboard under the stairs, fast and suppressed, but real. Then she smiled again. Then we'll try things, she said. That's the best way. They crossed through the gates, into the light of the Aureate Court, and behind him the world he'd been given rearranged itself into the world he'd been kept from, and Harry Potter, who was 10 years old and sovereign of 14 nations and had a stomach that needed feeding and exactly one photograph of his mother, walked into it with his head up. A girl appeared from beside one of the gate pillars, about 13, blonde, with the Veela presence dialed down from impossible to merely very striking, and she looked at Harry with an expression that was not impressed and not dismissive but something more specific. The look of a person who has prepared for an important arrival and is now recalibrating because the arrival is smaller and younger and more ordinary-looking than anticipated. "This is my daughter Fleur," Apollon said. Fleur looked at Harry. Harry looked back at Fleur. "You're 10, she said. "Yes," Harry said. A pause. "Can you even do magic yet?" "Can't do it in England without getting a formal caution from the ministry," Harry said. "But yes. Things happen when I want them to." Fleur considered this. Then she turned and walked into the court without further comment. Harry followed. He wasn't sure if this was an insult or an invitation or just how Fleur Delacour moved through the world, but he suspected he was going to find out. From behind a pillar on the other side, considerably smaller, a girl of about 8 with the same blonde hair looked at Harry with enormous blue eyes and absolutely no social filter whatsoever. "Are you really the king?" she demanded. "Sovereign," Harry said. "There's a distinction, apparently." "That's the same thing," the 8-year-old said firmly. "Gabriel," Apollon said. "He doesn't look like a king," Gabriel continued, unabashed. "He looks like he needs a sandwich." Harry, who genuinely needed a sandwich, found, to his mild surprise, that he was almost smiling. "Yeah," he said. "I really do." They fed him in a side room off the main entrance hall, a room that was smaller and more human-scaled than the court's vast interior, with windows that caught the Camargue light and a table with actual food on it, not half-portions or leftovers or the particular damp quality of hastily prepared obligatory meals. Apollon sat across from him and talked, not at him but with him, about practical things, how the court worked, what the next few days would involve, what he absolutely did not have to do before he was ready. He listened, ate, and said relatively little, but the questions he asked were specific enough that Apollon twice paused and looked at him with a considering expression, like she was revising an estimate. Fleur sat at the end of the table and read something in French. She ate with the automatic efficiency of someone who didn't notice food because her mind was elsewhere. Twice she looked up and caught Harry looking at her with the particular focused attention he gave things he was trying to understand, and both times she looked back at her book without expression. Gabriel sat next to Harry and told him, in comprehensive detail and entirely without prompting, about every interesting thing she had seen in the past 3 days, including but not limited to a very large falcon, a small argument between 2 council members whose names she clearly wasn't supposed to know, and a recipe for something involving lavender that she'd gotten from the kitchen staff. "You're talking very fast," Harry observed, at a brief pause in the lavender recipe. "I know," Gabriel said serenely. "Maman says it's a feature." He almost smiled again. It was becoming a habit, which was unusual. Apollon waited until he'd eaten enough that the hollow sound had stopped, and then she said, "I want to be honest with you about something, Harry." He looked up. "The Grand Matriarch, Serafina Voss, she is the one who ultimately matters, politically, in the first days. She accepted the blood test result. She has accepted your sovereignty. But she," Apollon paused, choosing words with care, "she will want to know what kind of person you are. She will not be rude about it, but she will be direct. She has been waiting for the sovereign bloodline to return for 100 years and she needs to know that the person sitting on that throne is worthy of what she's about to hand to them." "What kind of test?" Harry asked. "It won't be formal," Apollon said. "That's what makes it difficult. She'll simply talk to you. And you'll simply talk back. And she'll form a view. What happens if her view is bad?" "It won't be," Apollon said, with a certainty that was either reassuring or itself a test. "But if it were, the blood confirms sovereignty, Harry. No one can take that from you. The question is whether the council works with you or around you. You want them working with you. I want to understand what I've actually inherited before I start making decisions, Harry said. Is that reasonable? Very. And I want to know why it was me, he said. Not just the blood test. The deeper answer. What's the history? Where does the Aureate line come from and how did it end up in a wizard family in Surrey? Apollon looked at him for a moment. The Grand Matriarch, she said, will be very relieved you asked that. Those are exactly the right questions. Fleur looked up from her book. She was looking at Harry with the same expression as before, but something in it had shifted slightly. The recalibration was still happening, but it seemed to have moved in a direction she hadn't expected. You'll want to know about the Accord as well, Fleur said. Not a question. Harry looked at her. The Accord of Living Skies? Yes. Can you explain it to me, or should I be asking someone else? A pause. Fleur closed her book. Placed it flat on the table. I can explain it, she said. I've studied it for 3 years. Good, Harry said. Tell me. And she did, for the next hour, while the Camargue light moved across the windows and Gabrielle fell asleep against Harry's shoulder and Apollon sat back with her tea and listened to her 13-year-old daughter explain the 100-year-old treaty that governed 14 nations to a 10-year-old boy who asked sharp questions at every opportunity and whose face, she noticed, did not do the thing that most children's faces did when the material became complicated. It didn't flatten into the polite emptiness of someone waiting for it to end. It sharpened. Outside, the Aureate court breathed its slow, enormous breath, and the afternoon deepened into something gold, and the councillors moved through the halls preparing for what came next, and the Grand Matriarch sat in her high room and looked south over the mountains and waited. And Harry Potter, who was 10 years old and had never mattered to anyone, sat in a room with people who were beginning to understand that he was going to matter very much, ate his second piece of bread, and learned the rules. He was already thinking about which ones he'd need to change. Chapter 2, The Weight of 14 Crowns. The Grand Matriarch's room was at the top of the court's central tower, and the tower had no stairs. Harry discovered this when Apollon led him there after dinner, a proper dinner, 3 courses, the kind of food he'd read about in books and never been particularly close to in real life, and they reached the base of the tower and there was simply a circular room with a floor made of the same pale amber stone as the rest of the court, and walls, and no staircase. How do you get up? He asked. You want to go up, Apollon said. And you step forward. He looked at her. She was completely serious. He looked at the floor in front of him, which was just floor, and he stepped forward, and the court moved him. It was the only way he could describe it afterward, not an elevator, not a platform, not a magical escalator, but the building itself, rearranging itself around him the way water rearranges around a hand, and then he was at the top and Apollon was beside him and the door ahead of them was already open. It responds to intent, Apollon said quietly. The court always has. That's the first thing you should know about it. Harry filed that away. He was building an internal list of things the court did, which already had 7 items on it and was growing steadily. The room beyond the open door was round and high-ceilinged and full of evening light from windows that were open to the mountain air. It contained a desk covered in papers, 3 mismatched chairs, an enormous bookshelf that had gone beyond mere capacity and was now in negotiation with the ceiling, and the Grand Matriarch. Serafina Voss was old. Not in the way that Vernon was old, 50-something with complaints about his back, but in the way that some landscapes were old, carrying the evidence of everything that had happened on them in their surface. Her face was deeply lined, her hair white and braided back, and she sat in the chair behind the desk not like a ruler sitting in state but like a woman who had sat in this particular chair for so long it had arranged itself specifically around her. She was small. Harry noticed that first, smaller than he'd expected from the way people talked about her, barely larger than him. She was reading something when they entered. She finished the sentence, set the paper down, and looked at him. Her eyes were gold. The same color as the bowl had been when his blood hit it. Harry Potter, she said. Her voice was deep for her size, unhurried, carrying the very faint trace of an accent he couldn't identify, older than French, older than most modern European languages felt. Sit down. Apollon, thank you, you may go. Apollon went. Harry sat in a chair across the desk from Serafina Voss, put his hands on his knees, and looked at her steadily. She looked back at him with those gold eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and Harry understood this was deliberate on her part. The silence itself was the beginning of the assessment, and so he didn't fill it nervously, just let it sit there between them like a neutral object. "You're smaller than I expected," she said finally. "I've been underfed," Harry said. She nodded once, as though this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "The people who had you. Were they cruel?" "Deliberately, sometimes. Mostly they were just absent." He thought about it. "Like I was something they had to store until someone came to collect it. Today someone came. Does that make you angry?" Harry considered the question genuinely. "Not really," he said. "I think it did sometimes, when I was younger. Now it mostly just seems like a fact. Things were that way. Now they're different." "That's either very healthy or very practiced," Serafina said. "Probably a bit of both," Harry said. The corner of her mouth moved. "The blood test was conclusive," she said, shifting. "You know this. What you may not fully understand is what conclusive means in practice. The Aureate line did not simply die out, it vanished. 107 years ago, the last confirmed sovereign of the Veela Throne disappeared. No body. No trace. The throne went into a state of what we call hollow waiting, and it has been in that state ever since. Until it sent a signal 3 months ago," Harry said. "Yes. Where did the sovereign go?" Harry asked. 107 years ago. Serafina looked at him for a moment. "That," she said, "is a better opening question than most of my council members would think to ask." She stood, moved to the window, looked out at the mountains. "Her name was Alara Voss. She was my grandmother." The room was very quiet. "She had 2 children," Serafina continued. "One who remained in the Veela nations. One who left, who chose to live among wizards, in Britain, because she fell in love with one, and the throne at that time could be set aside if the sovereign had no immediate heir and appointed a steward. She set aside the throne. She went to England. She had children." A pause. Her line continued among wizards, diluting with each generation, until the blood decided it had diluted enough and called itself home. "Through me," Harry said. "Through you. Your mother was Veela-blooded on her mother's side, which was not known to the wider magical world because it is not the kind of thing wizard families advertise, and the Veela blood does not express visibly in those whose wizard inheritance is strong enough to overlay it." She turned from the window. "Your mother was a remarkable witch, by all accounts." Harry looked at his hands. "I have a photograph of her," he said. "That's all." Serafina came back to her chair and sat down. "I know a great deal about Lily Evans Potter," she said, and her voice had shifted into something gentler without losing its directness. "She was traced, identified, and watched by the council for 6 years before her death. We knew what she was. We were preparing an approach. When she died, the trace went cold. The bloodline seemed to have ended." A pause. "We didn't know about you. Not until the throne called." Harry absorbed this. So for 10 years the throne had its sovereign sitting in a cupboard in Surrey. Something moved through Serafina's face, fierce and controlled, and gone quickly. "Yes," she said, with a clipped precision that told him the emotion underneath it was significant. "We will not be repeating that failure." "No," Harry agreed. He said it simply, without accusation. "Can I ask you something directly?" "Please." "What do you actually need from me?" He leaned forward slightly. "Not what the blood test says, not what the accord requires. What do the 14 nations actually need from whoever sits on that throne? Because I want to understand the real thing, not the formal thing. Serafina was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at him the way Apollon had looked at him that afternoon, recalibrating. Leadership, she said. Not in the ceremonial sense. The Veela nations have been self-governing for a century and we have managed. But we have managed as 14 separate entities pulling in 14 different directions, without the central sovereignty that the Accord requires for certain decisions, treaties with the wider magical world, the arbitration of internation disputes, the management of the living magic that connects the nations to the throne and the throne to the land itself. She paused. The living magic has been weakening. Slowly. For a century. Like a body without its heart still functioning but using reserves that will eventually run out, Harry finished. Yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. So I'm not ceremonial, he said. No. And the people who've been running things for 100 years without a sovereign, he thought about the counselors, the careful formality, the clear depth of experience, they're going to have very strong opinions about how things should work. Also yes. And some of them are going to think a 10-year-old wizard who didn't know he was Veela 3 days ago should be managed, Harry said. The Grand Matriarch looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something he hadn't seen yet. She smiled, fully, genuinely, the real version. Also yes, she said. I imagine some of them will try. What happens when they do? Harry asked. That, Serafina said, depends entirely on you. He slept well, which surprised him, because he'd expected the unfamiliar bed and the unfamiliar sounds and the weight of the day to make sleep difficult. Instead he dropped into it like a stone into water, and woke to Camargue morning light and birdsong and the smell of coffee from somewhere nearby, and lay there for 2 minutes and 30 seconds thinking about what the Grand Matriarch had said, and then got up. Fleur was in the corridor outside his room, which startled him. She was sitting with her back to the wall and her book open in her lap, and she looked up when his door opened with the expression of someone who has been waiting and is mildly annoyed at themselves for it. Maman asked me to make sure you didn't get lost, she said. The court moves when you want to go somewhere, Harry said. It does when you know where you want to go. Do you know where you want to go? He considered. Where do people go in the morning? Maman's rooms, for breakfast. The library. The training grounds. She stood, tucking the book under her arm with practiced efficiency. Where do you want to go? Training grounds, Harry said. She looked at him. It's 6 in the morning. Yes. He started walking and, after a half-second pause, she fell into step beside him. The court moved for them, corridors rearranging, stairs appearing, distances negotiating themselves, and Harry paid close attention to the way it felt, the same half-heard sound from the past 3 days now fuller and more present, like music becoming audible as you approach its source. You felt the throne before we arrived, Fleur said. It wasn't quite a question. For 3 days, Harry said. You knew I did. Therian told the council. Some of them were, it was considered unusual. That I could feel it. That you could feel it across that distance, through the kind of magical suppression that area of England has. She paused. Surrey is within the anti-magical expression zone for underage wizards. The ministry's trace is very strong there. The throne called through all of that. The throne was apparently very motivated, Harry said. Fleur made a small sound that was adjacent to a laugh. The training grounds were at the east end of the court, where the building opened onto a wide terrace of pale stone that looked out over a valley still full of morning mist. At this hour they were empty, which was what Harry had wanted. He stood at the edge of the terrace and looked out at the mist and felt the throne sound in his chest, steady as a heartbeat. What can you do? Fleur asked. She was standing to his left, arms crossed, watching him with the same assessing look she'd had since they met. Wandless things, he said. I've never had a wand. Things happen when I need them to. He paused. Useful things, mostly. Sometimes things I didn't specifically intend but that turned out to be exactly what the situation needed. Like what? I got onto the school roof once, he said. When Dudley's gang was chasing me. I didn't decide to, I just wanted to be somewhere they weren't, and then I was on the roof. Instantaneous displacement, Fleur said. That's a fourth-year concept at Beauxbatons. I was 8, Harry said. She absorbed this. What else? When I was very cold once, in the garden, November, they'd forgotten to call me in or decided not to, I stopped being cold. I could feel that I'd made the air immediately around me warmer. I had to be careful about the visible radius because I didn't want them to see. Thermomantic adjustment. She said it with the automatic precision of someone who thinks in the proper names for things. That's, she paused. Also not simple, Harry said mildly. Not simple, she agreed. She uncrossed her arms. What do you want to do out here? I want to know what it feels like when I don't have to be careful about the radius, he said. Fleur stepped back. She did it quickly, decisively, which he appreciated, no dithering, no negotiation. She moved about 10 feet back and stood clear, watching. Harry turned to face the valley. He breathed in. The mist was still, the birds just waking, the light just beginning to acquire real warmth. He could feel the throne sound stronger here than anywhere he'd been so far, like the court was more concentrated on this terrace, more present. He reached for the warm. Not a small radius. Not a careful bubble. He thought about warmth the way you think about a word you know perfectly well but have never spoken aloud, and let it out fully, and the air around him shifted, and the mist in the valley below reacted, not melting, not scattering, but rising, moving, a slow gentle thermal lift in great sheets of morning fog and languid curls up toward the light. He held it for 10 seconds and then let it go. The mist settled. The valley was noticeably clearer. He turned around. Fleur was looking at him and she was doing the thing she did when she was recalibrating where she hadn't expected to, the very slight rearrangement of her expression that she probably thought was invisible. On a different face it might have been. Harry had been reading faces since he was old enough to understand that faces carried information their owners didn't intend to broadcast. Right, Fleur said. Right, Harry agreed. You've never had a lesson. Never been taught anything magical. Only what I've figured out myself. And you've been figuring it out for how long? Harry thought about the roof at 8. About the warmth in the November garden. About the time, age 6, when a particularly aggressive burst of frustration had bent every spoon in the Dursley kitchen simultaneously, which had produced consequences he preferred not to think about too carefully. A while, he said. Fleur turned and walked toward the entrance to the training hall, which was set into the court wall. Come on, she said. Where? I'm going to teach you something. If you're going to be in this court you should be able to do at least one thing correctly rather than instinctively. Harry followed her. Is there a difference? Instinct without structure, Fleur said, pushing the training hall door open, is like speaking a language fluently but not being able to write it. You can function. But you cannot, she searched for the word, compose. And you're going to teach me composition, Harry said. I'm going to try, Fleur said, which was, coming from Fleur, approximately as modest as she got. The training hall was high-ceilinged, floored with a material that absorbed impact, and lit by long windows that ran the length of the eastern wall. At 6:40 in the morning it was theirs entirely. Fleur positioned him in the center and stood across from him at about 15 feet and said, without preamble, light a fire. Not a thermal, a physical flame. No object. Just air. Harry raised an eyebrow. Good morning to you too. Can you do it? He thought about it. He'd never specifically tried. He reached inward in the way he'd learned to reach, not searching, more like listening, and felt the throne sound and behind it the older thing, the thing that had apparently been in the blood all along but quiet, like a river running underground. He thought about fire. The principle of it, not the visualization, heat concentrating, exciting particles, the chain reaction of combustion that his science teacher had explained last year and Harry had found privately extraordinary. A flame appeared in his palm. Clear and steady, about the size of a candle's worth, burning from nothing. Fleur looked at it. How long can you hold it? I don't know. I've never tried. Hold it and talk to me at the same time. About what? Tell me about the accord, she said. What I explained yesterday. Repeat it back. So he held the fire in his hand and talked about the Accord of Living Skies, the 100-year-old treaty that governed the relationships between the 14 Veela nations and their obligations to each other and to the central sovereignty of the Aureate Throne, and the specific clauses that Fleur had covered yesterday about territorial magic, about the rites of passage, about the arbitration system and the Council's emergency powers in the absence of a sovereign, and he got through most of it accurately enough that Fleur only corrected him twice, on details that required very specific legal wording to be technically correct. The fire burned in his hand the whole time. You learn fast, Fleur said, when he finished. I had to, Harry said simply. At school I couldn't be too obvious about it, Dudley would get, anyway. I learned to learn quietly. She nodded. She moved a step closer. Expand it, she said, nodding at the flame. To here, she gestured at the space between them, fill this air with light. Not heat, just light. He expanded it. The flame came apart into a broad diffuse glow, like bioluminescence, filling the air between them with something that was technically fire but had decided to express itself as illumination rather than combustion. The training hall went warm with it. Fleur stood in the middle of it, her hair catching the light in ways that were specifically unfair, and she was looking at him with the expression that had now completed its recalibration, not unimpressed, not impressed, but something more specific. Interested. Genuinely interested. The way someone looked when they discovered a problem worth thinking about. You're going to be difficult, she said. I'm going to try very hard not to be, Harry said. That's not what I meant. She stepped back out of the light. I meant that teaching you is going to be difficult because what you can do intuitively already exceeds the syllabus I was planning. What were you planning? Basic elemental expression, controlled release, intent precision. She listed them without vanity, just fact. You've demonstrated all three in the last 20 minutes without instruction. Then what do I actually need to learn? Harry asked. History, she said immediately. Specifically Veela history, which is not taught in wizard schools because wizard schools consider it niche. The Accord, which we covered. The living magic, what it is, where it comes from, why it's connected to the throne. The political structure of the 14 nations, because you'll have representatives of all 14 here within a week and you need to know which ones are historically allied and which ones have grievances and which ones will be watching you specifically for weakness. She paused. And Veela formal protocol, because some of the older nations have very specific expectations about how a sovereign conducts themselves, and violating them isn't fatal but it's expensive. Harry released the light, which dissolved cleanly. Start with the history, he said. The real history, where the Veela nations come from, where the throne comes from, where the living magic comes from. Not the version people tell children. Fleur looked at him. How do you know there's a version people tell children? There always is, Harry said. About everything important. She stood there for a moment, and then she did something she hadn't done before. She sat down on the training room floor, not elegantly, just directly, cross-legged, and looked up at him expectantly. He sat down across from her. And she told him the real history, the one that started not with treaties or thrones but with the oldest magic in Europe, older than wands, older than schools, the kind that existed before human beings decided magic needed to be contained in objects and codified in laws, the living magic that the Veela nations had been built on and that the Aureate Throne was the keystone of, and why its century of emptiness had been more than a political problem and less than a catastrophe only because the Grand Matriarch had spent 100 years being exceptionally good at her job. Harry listened and asked questions, and Fleur answered them and occasionally asked questions back, and outside the morning grew into itself and the court breathed slowly around them, and somewhere above them in her tower Seraphina Voss looked at the training hall windows and saw the diffuse light that had briefly glowed from them and was quiet for a moment before turning back to her papers. Apollon found them still there at 8:30 when she came looking. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, her daughter cross-legged on the floor talking about the wars of the amber sky with her hands, Harry listening with his chin on his knees and his eyes sharp, and she felt something in her chest settle that had been unsettled since the blood test results had come through and the council had begun debating whether a 10-year-old British wizard could actually carry the weight of what the throne required. She went to get breakfast and brought it back to them. Neither of them stopped talking while they ate. The council meeting was at noon. Harry had been told about it over breakfast. The full council, 9 members, convened to formally acknowledge the blood test results and begin the process of restoration. What he hadn't been told, Apollon mentioned as they were walking toward the council chamber, was that 2 of the 9 had formally filed a reservation. What kind of reservation? Harry asked. Not against your sovereignty, Apollon said carefully. The blood is clear. The reservation is against the timing of active rulership. The argument is that a sovereign of 10, untrained in Veela history and magic, should be guided more directly by the council in the interim period. Harry looked at her. Guided how directly? The specific language in the filing, Fleur said, on his other side, is co-regency with council oversight. Which is fancy language for the council making decisions, Harry said. Essentially. Who filed it? Councillor Renaud and Councillor Drax, Apollon said. Renaud has been on the council for 40 years. Drax represents the Meridian Nation, which is the largest of the 14 and has historically had the most independent approach to the accord. Harry walked through the corridor, the court moved for him, as always, corridors arranging themselves into a path, and he thought. Not about being angry at the reservation, which would have been a waste of energy. About why it had been filed. About what Renaud and Drax actually wanted, underneath the legal language, and whether that was the same thing or different, and what the most effective response was that didn't involve having an argument he wasn't yet equipped to win on their technical ground. Is the reservation public? He asked. The filing is, yes. All council filings are public record under the accord. Good, Harry said. Apollon looked at him. You have a thought. A few, Harry said. Can I ask, when the council convenes, does anyone else attend? Beyond the 9 members? Senior delegation members, as observers. Heads of nation households, if present. Who's present right now? Apollon thought. 3 household heads arrived overnight. Representatives from Camargue, Argentum, and Vale Nation. Plus the full diplomatic staff of the central delegation. 40 or 50 people, at least. As observers. Good. The council chamber was the largest room Harry had seen in the court, which was saying something given the court's general approach to scale. It was circular, which seemed to be a theme, with the council's 9 seats arranged in a curved line on a dais and the observer space, filled, as Apollon had predicted, ranged along the sides. Light came in from above through some kind of aperture Harry couldn't see directly but could feel, the same way you felt the source of warmth without seeing the sun. 9 councillors. Therian was among them, third from the left, and she gave Harry the smallest of acknowledgments when he entered, a fractional tilt of the head. The other 8 ranged in age and expression. 2 at the far right were watching Harry with the particular careful neutrality of people who had made a filing and were waiting to see how it landed. He identified those as Renaud and Drax without being told. Renaud was perhaps 60, thin, with precise features and the look of someone who had never said an imprecise thing in his professional life. Drax was younger, 40 perhaps, broader, with the look of someone who was comfortable being the largest person in a room and had built certain assumptions around that. Harry was brought to a chair position before the council's dais, not on the dais, not behind it, but in the middle of the open chamber floor. Observer seating was ranged on either side. He sat down, kept his hands loose in his lap, and looked at the 9 councillors with the same neutral steadiness he'd used with Seraphina the night before. Therion opened, formally, in the French that was the council's official language, and one of the staff translated in a low murmur near Harry's ear, though he found, with mild interest, that he could follow about 70% of the French directly. The throne sound seemed to have a linguistic component he hadn't noticed before, a kind of ambient comprehension he suspected was going to expand the more time he spent in the court. The blood test was formally acknowledged. The results entered into record. The sovereignty confirmed before witnesses. Standard procedure, moving efficiently until Renaud stood. He spoke in French. The translator murmured, "Councillor Renaud requests the floor to address the matter of the provisional governance filing." Therion acknowledged it. Renaud turned to face Harry, not to the council, directly to Harry, which was itself a choice, and began speaking in the careful, measured tone of someone who had prepared this speech. Translation: The council welcomes the return of the Aureate bloodline. This is a moment of historic significance and the council stands fully in recognition of Harry Potter's sovereign claim. However, the council must also act responsibly in the interests of the 14 nations. A sovereign of 10 years requires development, education, and careful introduction to the complex realities of internation governance. The co-regency proposal exists not to diminish the sovereign's authority but to support it, to ensure that decisions made in the name of the 14 nations are made with full knowledge and appropriate counsel. This is not an unusual provision. Historical precedent. May I ask a question? Harry said. The room went briefly still. The translator looked at him. Renaud paused mid-sentence. Therion said, in English, for Harry's benefit, which he noticed and appreciated, the sovereign may speak at any point in this proceeding. Harry stood up. He didn't do it dramatically, just stood, because it felt more natural to have this conversation on his feet than sitting down. He looked at Renaud. The co-regency proposal was filed yesterday, he said. I arrived the day before. Have I done something in that time that suggested poor judgment? A specific decision you disagreed with, a specific action that concerned you? Renaud blinked. Not, specifically, no. The proposal is precautionary, right, Harry said. So the proposal is based on my age rather than anything I've actually done. Your age and your lack of formal Veela education. I spent 6 hours yesterday learning the Accord, the history of the 14 nations, and the structure of living magic, Harry said. I'm going to spend 6 hours today doing the same thing. And the day after. I'm doing this because the nations need leadership, and I understand what's at stake if the living magic continues to weaken, and I take that seriously. He paused. But I want to be clear about something, Counselor, because I think clarity is better than having this same conversation 3 more times in different forms. He looked across the 9 seats, taking each counselor in for a moment before moving to the next. The blood test is what it is. I didn't ask for this throne. But I have it. And I'm not going to sit in it with someone else's hand on my shoulder telling me when to stand up. If you have concerns about a specific decision I make, I want to hear them. If you have expertise I need, I want it. The Council's experience over the past 100 years is something I genuinely need and I know that. He brought his gaze back to Renaud. But the co-regency proposal answers a question I haven't given you reason to ask yet. I'm asking you to withdraw it. The silence in the chamber was the kind that had texture. Renaud stood very straight. The proposal is legally filed and cannot be withdrawn without a formal vote, then call the vote, Harry said. Another silence. Drax, at the far end, shifted in his seat. Therion looked at Harry with those pale gold eyes. The sovereign requests an immediate vote on the co-regency proposal. All in favor of the proposal as filed. A pause. 3 hands. Renaud. Drax. A third counselor Harry hadn't focused on yet. 6 hands remained down. The proposal fails, Therion said, with the clean finality of someone who had perhaps expected this outcome and was not disappointed. The sovereign's full authority is uncontested. We move to the matter of the formal investiture schedule. Harry sat back down. He didn't look at Renaud, not to avoid him, just because there was nothing useful in that direction anymore and the investiture schedule was more interesting. In the observer seats to his left, he caught, peripherally, one of the household heads, a woman from the Camargue delegation, lean to her neighbor and say something in a rapid undertone. He couldn't make out the words. But the tone had the quality of someone revising an estimate. He was becoming familiar with that tone. Gabrielle found him that afternoon in the library, which was a room that appeared to have a complex relationship with the concept of finite space. He was working through a text on Veela living magic, actual text, not a translation, because the throne adjacency of the French was now helpful enough to make it possible with only occasional guesswork, and she came in, located him by some internal navigation system that seemed to have calibrated to his position in the court, and sat in the chair across from him with the settled authority of someone who has decided where they're sitting. Fleur says you had the council vote, she said. Fleur told you about that? Fleur tells Maman things and Maman forgets I'm in the room, Gabrielle said, not reproachfully, just as a factual description of how information traveled in their household. Did you really make them vote right there in the meeting? It seemed like the quickest way to settle it, Harry said. Councillor Renaud is going to be cross, Gabrielle said, with the philosophical calm of someone who has watched adults be cross for years and found it manageable. Probably, Harry said. That's all right. He'll be less cross once things are actually working properly and he can see that. Gabrielle looked at him. You're very sure, she said. About what? That things will work properly. She said it not as a challenge but with genuine curiosity, the way children ask things when they actually wanted to know. Harry thought about it. I'm not sure things will work easily, he said. I'm sure that I'm going to work at them until they do. That's different. Gabrielle accepted this with the dignity of someone who found it satisfying. Then she pulled a book from the shelf nearest to her, apparently at random, opened it, and began reading with the tranquil industry of a child in a library. The companionship was offered and accepted without commentary. They sat there together in the afternoon quiet, reading, the library organizing itself gently around them, and the court breathed, and the living magic that ran through the walls and floors and towers of the Aureate seat of power moved more easily than it had in a long time, like a river finding a path that had been blocked and cleared. Fleur came to find them at 6 and stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them across the library and said nothing for a moment. Harry looked up. I have questions about the Meridian Nation, he said. Specifically why Drax's vote concerns me more than Renaud's. Why does Drax concern you more? Fleur said, coming in, pulling a chair up. Because Renaud's opposition is ideological, he doesn't think a child should be sovereign, that's a principled position and I can work with it. But Drax represents Meridian, which is the largest nation and has historically been the most independent. His reservation wasn't about my age. He was using Renaud's argument as cover for something else. Fleur sat down. She was looking at him the way she had in the training hall. What else? I don't know yet, Harry said. That's why I have questions. Gabrielle turned a page without looking up. Meridian has been blocking the Northern Water Rights renewal for 3 years, she said conversationally. Fleur and Harry both looked at her. Gabrielle looked up, found them both staring, and said with dignity, Maman talks about it a lot. Harry turned back to Fleur. Tell me about the Northern Water Rights renewal, he said. Fleur told him. The library darkened around them as the light moved, and Harry listened and asked questions that got more specific as his understanding deepened, and Fleur answered and occasionally pushed back when he drew a conclusion too quickly and told him why, and Gabrielle provided 3 more apparently random observations that turned out to be precisely relevant. And by the time Apollon came to insist they came for dinner, Harry had a reasonable working model of why Drax had filed the reservation and what it would cost him if the sovereign's authority settled fully and completely in the Aureate court. He also had an idea about the water rights that he wasn't ready to share yet. He ate dinner with the Delacours in Apollon's suite. It had started feeling natural remarkably quickly, which he thought about briefly and then decided not to overthink, and listened to Apollon and Fleur discuss the formal investiture that would happen at the end of the week. He watched Gabrielle eat in the determined way she approached meals, as though food were a project. Serafina Voss appeared at the dinner's end, which Harry suspected wasn't coincidental, and sat across from him with a cup of tea and looked at him with those gold eyes. "You had an interesting council meeting," she said. "I've had an interesting 2 days," Harry said. "How do you feel about what's coming?" she asked. He thought about Drax and the water rights and Renault's principled opposition and the living magic weakening in the walls of 14 nations and the investiture at the end of the week when he would formally sit in the Aureate Throne for the first time and whatever that would do, and also about Gabrielle's certain announcement that the falcon she'd seen 3 days ago was definitely living in the court's north tower, and about the way Fleur said his name now, the short slight revision in tone. That meant she'd decided he was worth talking to. "Ready," he said. Serafina looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once, with the settled quality of a woman who had been waiting for a very specific answer to a very specific question and had finally received it. Outside, the Camargue evening deepened into dark, and the Aureate court breathed, and the living magic moved through its stones like blood through a warming body, and the hollow waiting that had lasted a century was, very slowly, beginning to end. Chapter 3. The Ministry blinks. First, the owl arrived at 7 in the morning, for days after Harry had walked out of Privet Drive. It was a Ministry owl, Harry could tell because it had the particular stiff-backed quality of a bird that had been bureaucratically processed, stamping its feet on the window ledge of Apollon's breakfast room with the air of something that expected to be taken seriously. The letter it carried had 6 seals, 3 signatures, and the words "urgent, matter of international jurisdiction" printed across the top in a red that was clearly trying very hard to be intimidating. Harry took it from the owl, gave the bird a piece of his toast because it looked like it had traveled far and deserved something for its trouble, and read the letter while Apollon poured coffee and Gabrielle watched him with the focused attention of someone reading a person rather than a page. The letter was from the office of the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, and it was addressed to the child Harry James Potter, currently in unlawful detention by foreign magical entities. Harry read that line twice and then continued. The substance of it, stripped of the legal scaffolding, was this: Harry Potter was a British magical citizen, a minor, and a ward of the British Ministry's protective mandate by virtue of certain classified considerations. His removal from British soil without ministry authorization was in violation of 6 specific statutes, 3 international agreements, and 1 provision of the Hogwarts Charter that Fudge had apparently included for completeness. The ministry demanded Harry's immediate return. A formal delegation would be dispatched within 48 hours to collect him if the matter was not resolved through correspondence. At the bottom, in a slightly different font, as though added by a different and more anxious hand, "We are also deeply concerned for Mr. Potter's well-being and want to ensure he is safe and comfortable." Harry set the letter down. Picked up his coffee. Thought. "Bad?" Apollon asked. "Predictable," Harry said. "They've sent a delegation. 48 hours. He slid the letter across the table to her. "Is this legal? The things they're citing?" Apollon read it with the focused efficiency of someone who had navigated bureaucratic documents for years. Her expression moved through neutral, to a slight tightening, to something that was almost amusement. "The 6 statutes they cite are all domestic British law. They have no jurisdiction here. The 3 international agreements, 2 of these predate the Accord of Living Skies and are superseded by it. The third is," she paused, "actually not relevant to this situation at all. I think someone included it hoping we wouldn't check." "And the Hogwarts Charter provision?" "Harry, the Hogwarts Charter governs students enrolled at Hogwarts." "You've never been enrolled at Hogwarts." "Right." He nodded. "So legally this is empty," Apollon said. "Dressed up very carefully, but empty. But they're sending a delegation anyway." "Yes." Harry drank his coffee. "Good," he said. "Let them come." Apollon looked at him with that particular expression she'd been developing over 4 days, the one that was part maternal concern and part the look of someone watching a chess player they'd underestimated work out a move 3 steps ahead. Harry, I want to receive them formally, he said. In the throne room. With council members present and the household heads as witnesses. A pause. That is your right as sovereign. I know. Can you help me understand the formal protocols for receiving a foreign political delegation? Specifically, who speaks first, seating arrangements, what I can and can't require of them before they're admitted. Apollon set the letter down and looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee, settled back in her chair, and said, the sovereign speaks first or delegates the opening. The delegation must stand until invited to sit. You can require, and she walked him through it, clearly and completely, while Gabrielle listened with the expression of someone filing information away for future use, and Fleur appeared at the door with her own coffee, caught the conversation midstream, and came in and sat down without being invited because the conversation clearly required her presence. By the time breakfast was finished, Harry had a working understanding of the formal reception protocol, 3 specific questions for Therion about the precise legal language of the Accord's sovereignty provisions, and an idea that he kept to himself for the moment because it needed to be correct before it was worth saying aloud. He saw Therion at 9 in the library. She came to him, which he noticed was itself a shift from the first day when he'd been brought to the councillors. The court was rearranging itself around him in small ways that he suspected were more significant than they appeared. The ministry letter, Therion said, taking the chair across from him and setting her own copy of it on the table. Someone had clearly briefed her. You've read it. I want to receive them in the throne room, Harry said. Formally. Therion's pale gold eyes moved over his face. The throne room means the investiture must happen first, she said. You haven't yet formally sat the throne. The room is, she paused, it would be inappropriate to conduct sovereign business in the throne room before the formal sitting. When is the investiture scheduled? End of the week. 2 days from now. Can we move it to tomorrow? Harry asked. A long pause. Therion was very still in the way that some people were when they were thinking rapidly behind a quiet exterior. The preparations, what preparations are incomplete? Another pause. Then, nothing that cannot be accelerated, she said carefully. Then let's accelerate it, Harry said. I want the ministry delegation to arrive at a court that has completed its investiture. I want them to walk into a throne room, not a transitional space. Therion looked at him. You want them to walk in after the fact, she said. To something settled. Not something in progress. Yes. She picked up her copy of the ministry letter and tapped the edge of it thoughtfully against the table. The Grand Matriarch will need to agree to the change. Would you take me to her? Harry said. Therion stood immediately, which told him she'd already known the question was coming. Seraphina took the news of the accelerated investiture with the tranquility of someone who had already considered the possibility. She asked Harry 3 questions about his reasoning, received 3 clear answers, and said, tomorrow morning, then. Sunrise. She said it with the finality of a woman who had spent a century making difficult decisions and had learned that once a decision was right, delay was its own kind of error. There's one other thing, Harry said. Seraphina waited. The throne room reception with the ministry delegation, I want it to be open. All household heads, all present delegates from the 14 nations, full observer access. Seraphina looked at him. You want witnesses. I want the 14 nations to see how this goes, Harry said. The ministry's argument is partly about jurisdiction and partly about the idea that what I am is still, negotiable. I want to demonstrate that it isn't. In front of everyone. A very long pause. Seraphina's gold eyes were steady on him. If it goes badly, she began. Then I'll learn from it in front of witnesses, Harry said. That's also fine. A sovereign who can't manage a setback isn't much of a sovereign. Seraphina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your great-great-grandmother Elara said something very similar once, in my presence, when she was approximately your age. She said it quietly, more to herself than to him. Then she looked up. Tomorrow at sunrise. Open court. I'll have the arrangements made. Harry was at the door when she said, "Harry." He turned. "Are you frightened?" she asked. Not cruelly, not as a test. Genuinely. He thought about it honestly. Not of the ministry, he said. A little of getting it wrong. But not enough to stop. Seraphina nodded slowly. That, she said, is exactly the right amount of frightened. The investiture happened at sunrise and it was nothing like what Harry had expected and everything the Aureate court had been building toward since the moment his blood turned the bowl gold. He'd expected ceremony. Robes and speeches and the 9 counselors in formal arrangement and something like a crown being placed on his head by someone with an important title. There was some of that, robes, yes, something in deep gold that fit him properly for the first time in his memory, which was disorienting in a way he hadn't anticipated, the 9 counselors, yes, present and arranged, Seraphina, yes, conducting something in the ancient language he half understood through the throne sound. But the moment that mattered wasn't the ceremony. The throne room was at the court's heart, and the throne itself was, not what he'd imagined. It was not a grand chair. It was a structure of pale amber stone and what appeared to be living wood, branches grown and shaped into something that was more like a tall seat in a forest than a royal throne, and it was warm to the touch when he approached it. He could feel it from 20 feet away. The throne sound, which had been present as background since Surrey, became a full chord as he crossed the room, harmony, multiple frequencies resolving into coherence, the way a piece of music resolved into its final note. He sat down. The room went white. Not blinding, warm, like opening a door into sunlight. Every person in the room felt it, he could tell by the collective intake of breath, by the way the counselors straightened and the household heads shifted and Apollon, standing to the left with Fleur and Gabrielle, raised her hand to her mouth briefly. Seraphina stood before him and her gold eyes went briefly incandescent, lit from within, and she bowed, fully, deeply, the bow of someone choosing to bow rather than being required to, which was entirely different. The throne is seated, she said, in the ancient language, and this time Harry understood every word. The light faded slowly. The throne had rearranged itself slightly around him, or he had rearranged around it, he couldn't be sure which, and the living magic that moved through the court was different now, fuller, like a river at depth rather than spread thin. He could feel all of it. The walls, the floors, the towers, the open sky above the court where birds were beginning to move in the early morning air. He could feel, faintly and distantly but definitely, 14 directions pulling gently outward. 14 nations, like strings on an instrument, all running back to this room, this seat, this moment. He sat with it for a moment. Then he said, to the room at large, the ministry delegation arrives tomorrow. I want everyone who wishes to attend to be in this room at 10 in the morning. He stood up from the throne and walked out of the room and went to have breakfast. Gabrielle fell into step beside him immediately, as though she'd been posted. You glowed, she informed him. I noticed, Harry said. It was very impressive, she said. Even Fleur looked surprised. And Fleur never looked surprised. Fleur was surprised yesterday when I got the moisture extraction technique right on the first try, Harry said. She just does it quietly. That's true, Gabrielle conceded. She was surprised in her eyebrows. You have to watch the eyebrows. Harry filed this away, which was becoming a habit with things Gabrielle said. The 48 hours became 36 because the ministry, apparently panicking slightly, sent their delegation early. They arrived at the court's main gate at 9:45 the next morning, which gave Harry exactly 15 minutes from when the gate guard sent word to when he needed to be in the throne room. He used 12 of those minutes to change into the gold robes from the investiture, eat the last of his breakfast, and tell Fleur 3 specific things he needed her to verify about the Accord's Article 7 before the meeting started. She verified all 3 in the remaining 3 minutes through some combination of memory and rapid page-turning that he was learning to take for granted. The ministry delegation was 5 people. He watched them cross the court's entrance hall through the high window of the corridor above, two officials in ministry robes with the distinctive plum color that apparently signaled authority, two individuals in legal robes carrying briefcases that were doing the magical equivalent of bursting at the seams with documents, and one person who was not dressed officially at all but who carried himself with a deliberate casualness that Harry recognized immediately as the kind of deliberate casualness that people performed when they wanted you to think they weren't the most important person in the room. He was perhaps 60, heavy-set, with the flushed complexion of someone who ate well and didn't particularly worry about it, wearing robes of middling quality that were nonetheless precisely fitted in a way that suggested money applied to appear like its absence. Harry looked at him through the window for a moment. Then he looked at Therian, who was standing beside him. "Who's the one in the plain robes?" Therian's expression didn't change. "Cornelius Fudge," she said. "The Minister for Magic. He was not listed in the official delegation." "He came anyway," Harry said. "Apparently." Harry thought about this. Fudge had sent a formal delegation, 2 officials, 2 lawyers, and then come himself without announcement, in plain clothes, as though he just happened to arrive at the same time. It was a move that was trying to be several things at once, present without being formally present, authoritative without being cornered into a position. "He's nervous," Harry said. "The Minister for Magic," Therian said carefully, "is not accustomed to situations where British authority is not the largest thing in the room." "Good," Harry said. "Let's go." The throne room at 10 in the morning was full. All 9 councillors were seated in their formal arrangement to the left of the throne. The 3 household heads who'd arrived 4 days ago had been joined by 5 more overnight. Word of the ministry letter had travelled fast through the Veela political network, and it turned out that the prospect of watching the new sovereign handle British ministry pressure was sufficiently compelling that people had rearranged travel schedules. 47 observers in total, ranged along the walls in the high-backed chairs that the court had apparently produced for the occasion. Apollon near the front. Gabrielle beside her, sitting with the angelic composure of a child who has been firmly instructed to behave and has decided to treat this as a performance opportunity. Fleur stood to the right of the throne, 1 step back. She'd appeared there without being asked, with the natural authority of someone who had decided where they belonged and stopped waiting to be placed. Harry had looked at her and she'd looked back, and that had been the entirety of the conversation. Harry sat in the throne. The throne room doors opened. The 5 ministry officials were admitted and arranged themselves in the open space before the throne. Fudge had dropped the plainclothes performance. He was in the center, his robes now carrying the ministry crest, his chin up, his expression composed into the particular blend of authority and friendliness that Harry suspected worked very well on most people most of the time. Fudge looked at the room. He had clearly expected something else. Something smaller, more improvised, more like a temporary arrangement. His eyes moved across the councillors, the household heads, the observers, the throne itself, and Harry sitting in it. "Mr. Potter," Fudge said, with the warm authority of a man who had decided to lead with warmth. "I'm so glad we were able to, Councillor Therian," Harry said, without raising his voice. Therian stood. "The formal reception of the British ministry delegation is now in session. Under Aureate court protocols, the sovereign speaks first. All standing parties will remain standing until invited to be seated by the sovereign." Fudge stopped. He'd been about to continue speaking. He recalibrated, the friendliness becoming more cautious. Harry looked at him steadily. "Minister Fudge. You sent a letter claiming jurisdiction over my person. You also arrived in this delegation without being formally listed, which I'll note but not make a formal issue of because I think directness is more useful than procedure for what we actually need to discuss." He paused. "Please sit." The invitation came as a surprise. He could see Fudge recalibrating again, adjusting to a register he hadn't expected. 5 chairs had been arranged in an arc. The delegation sat. One of the legal officials immediately opened his briefcase and produced a document that was clearly designed to be produced immediately upon sitting, like a weapon drawn on a signal. "Mr. Potter, if I could direct your attention to, in a moment," Harry said pleasantly. "Minister Fudge. Why did you come yourself? Fudge blinked. I felt it was important to personally. The letter claimed I was in unlawful detention, Harry said. If that were true, you'd have sent Aurors rather than lawyers. So you knew the detention claim was wrong when you made it. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Why did you come yourself? Fudge's composure was good. It was the composure of a man who'd held political office for years and had learned to absorb unexpected moments. But something in his eyes shifted, a brief recalculation. He looked at Harry, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since entering the room, and whatever he was recalibrating toward was more serious than what he'd walked in with. I came, Fudge said carefully, because Harry Potter is a significant individual in the British magical world, and his sudden departure from British jurisdiction has caused significant concern among many people. Concern for me, Harry said. Or concern about what I am? A pause. Fudge chose to be honest, which Harry respected. Both. All right, Harry said. Then let me address both. I'm fine. Quite comfortable, actually. Better fed than I was in Surrey, which is a low bar but I clear it. He heard something in the observer seats that was almost certainly Gabrielle stifling something. He continued. And what I am, the blood test has been formally entered into international magical record. I'm the sovereign of the Aureate Throne and 14 Veela nations. That's not a claim. That's a confirmed fact with legal standing in every magical jurisdiction that has ratified the Living Skies Accord, which includes Britain. The legal official made another movement toward his documents. Mr. Potter, with respect, British domestic law, Councillor Therian, Harry said. Therian stood again. She looked at the legal official with the patient clarity of someone about to explain something to a person who should already know it. Article 7 of the Accord of Living Skies, ratified by the British Ministry of Magic in 1897 and never formally withdrawn, explicitly states that the confirmed sovereign of the Aureate Throne holds full international legal personhood independent of any domestic jurisdiction, including the jurisdiction of their nation of birth. It further states that any domestic claim of wardship, guardianship, or minor status protections are superseded upon blood confirmation. She paused. We would have sent you the relevant citations in our response, had you given us 48 hours to do so. The legal official's document had not quite made it all the way out of the briefcase. It went back in. Fudge was quiet for a moment. He was doing the calculation that Harry had watched him approaching since he sat down, the calculation of what this situation actually was versus what he'd assumed it was when he wrote the letter. The ministry, Fudge said slowly, has interests in your situation, Mr. Potter, that go beyond jurisdiction. I know, Harry said. Fudge looked at him sharply. The prophecy, Harry said. Or, not the prophecy, specifically, but the fact of Voldemort. The fact that I'm connected to that in a way that the British magical world considers relevant to its future. He watched Fudge's expression move through several phases at the use of the name. You're worried that if I'm here, outside British jurisdiction, I'm outside your ability to prepare me, I suppose. To manage whatever's coming. I wouldn't phrase it quite, I know, Harry said again. But that's what you mean. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, interested. Minister, I'm 10. I'm not going to war with Voldemort this week. I'm learning what I am and what I've inherited. That process is going to take time and it's going to happen here because this is where my throne is and this is where my people are. He paused. But I'm not opposed to a relationship with the British ministry. I'm not opposed to communication, to information sharing, to, at the right time, in the right way, cooperation regarding the threat that both our worlds face. Fudge was very still. What I'm opposed to, Harry continued, is the ministry's assumption that I'm a British citizen first and a sovereign second. I'm not. The blood confirmed a sovereignty that precedes my birth in Britain by 100 years. That takes precedence. He met Fudge's eyes. But I'd like to be useful to both my people and yours. That possibility exists, if we handle this correctly. The throne room was very quiet. 47 observers were watching Cornelius Fudge make a decision. Fudge looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he looked at the room, the counselors, the household heads, the assembled witnesses. He was a political animal and he could read a room, and the room was telling him something very specific about where the weight sat. The ministry, Fudge said carefully, would be open to a formal dialogue. A communication framework between the Aureate court and the Ministry of Magic. Good, Harry said. I'll have Councillor Therian's office draft proposed terms. There is also, Fudge said, and here his voice shifted into something that was trying to be delicate, the matter of your education. Hogwarts is in Britain, Harry said. My education is happening here. I'm learning things at the Aureate court that Hogwarts cannot teach me. He paused. But I'll think about whether there's a formal arrangement that makes sense. When I've thought about it, I'll let you know. Fudge absorbed this. He nodded, a small, careful nod, the nod of a man who has come to collect something and is leaving without it but has preserved his dignity in the process, which was probably the best available outcome. We will wait to hear from you, Mr. Potter. Harry said. You can call me Harry. A pause. Something in Fudge shifted, not warmth, exactly, but a loosening. Harry, he said. And then, with an abruptness that suggested the thought had gotten out before he'd processed it fully, your mother. Lily Evans. She was, the ministry knew her. She was extraordinary. Harry looked at him. Yes, he said. I know. Fudge stood. His delegation stood with him. We'll see ourselves out, he said, and then caught himself. If that's acceptable to the court. Therian, Harry said. The delegation is thanked for attending, Therian said, rising. An escort will be provided to the gate. The delegation filed out. Fudge was at the rear. At the door, he turned and looked back at Harry once, the look of a man updating a file in his head, and then he was gone. The throne room exhaled. Someone in the observer seats actually began to applaud and then thought better of it halfway through and it died awkwardly, which was somehow the most human moment in the entire proceeding. Harry stood from the throne. He was tired in the specific way of having been very concentrated for a long time, the way his mind felt after 6 hours of reading, pleasantly spent. He looked at Therian. Can you draft the communication framework terms by Friday? Yes, Therian said. I want a clause guaranteeing information sharing on Voldemort-related activity, Harry said. Both ways. If they know something we need to know, they tell us. If we know something they need, we tell them. Therian looked at him for a moment with the expression she'd had when the blood first turned the bowl gold. I'll include it, she said. He stepped down from the dais. Apollon was there immediately, and she put her hand briefly on his shoulder, not performing comfort, just contact, the kind that meant I was watching and you did well, and he felt it land differently than he expected. He let himself feel it rather than cataloguing it. Gabrielle appeared from the observer seats. He kept blinking, she said, about Fudge. When you said the V word. He blinked so fast. Gabrielle, Apollon said. It's true, Gabrielle said. She looked at Harry. Were you scared? Of Fudge? No. Of saying the wrong thing. Harry thought about Seraphina's question. The right amount of frightened. A little, he said. Just enough. Gabrielle nodded as though this was a satisfactory answer. You should eat something, she said. Your face goes very still when you're concentrating and you didn't eat breakfast properly. Harry realized she was right about the breakfast. He'd eaten half of it. Yes, he said. Let's eat. Fleur appeared on his left. She said nothing, but she fell into step with the easy naturalness of someone who had decided that walking beside him was simply where she was. They were halfway to the corridor when she said, the Waterites. He looked at her. That's what you were thinking about with Drax, she said. While you were doing the fudge meeting. You were doing two things at once. He had been, actually. What made you notice? You do this thing with your right hand, she said. When you're solving something. Your fingers move slightly, like you're writing. He looked at his right hand. He hadn't known he did that. The Water Rights Agreement has a clause in Article 12 that I think Meridian has been misreading intentionally for 3 years, he said. If I'm right, Drax's entire obstruction falls apart because the clause he's been using to justify the blockage doesn't say what he's been claiming it says. Fleur was quiet for 3 steps. If you're right, she said. That's why I haven't said it yet, Harry said. Can you read Article 12 tonight and tell me if I'm reading it correctly? I've already read Article 12, Fleur said. And? A pause. I think you might be right, she said. Like it cost her something. I'll check the original language. The French translation has some ambiguity that the Veela original might resolve. Thank you, Harry said. She shrugged with the specific Gallic shoulder movement that meant don't thank me, I'm doing it because it interests me, which he was also learning to read. He found it considerably more honest than performances of generosity and didn't say so because he thought she'd find being understood about that irritating. He was probably right. The rest of the day moved in the way that days in the court were beginning to move, fast and layered, one thing sliding into the next without clean divisions. He spent an hour with Serafina discussing the longer implications of the ministry meeting. She asked sharper questions than anyone else in the court, and he gave sharp answers back, and the rhythm of it had acquired over 4 days the quality of something he looked forward to. She pushed, not to be difficult but because she needed him to be sharper than he was, and the only way to get there was friction. Fudge will go back and report to Dumbledore, Serafina said, near the end of the hour. Harry had been thinking about this. Tell me about Dumbledore, he said. Serafina looked at him. What do you know about him? He's the headmaster of Hogwarts. He's considered the most powerful wizard alive. He knew my mother. He paused. He put me with the Dursleys. Serafina was very still. You know that? I worked it out, Harry said. The Dursleys said they'd been told to keep me. Someone told them. Someone decided where I went after my parents died. That's not a ministry decision, it's too specific, too arranged. Dumbledore arranged it. He did, Serafina said. I know because we protested, at the time, though our protests were limited since we hadn't confirmed your bloodline. We raised concerns about the Dursley household. Dumbledore's response was that the blood protection, your mother's sacrifice creating a protection anchored to her blood, was strongest at your mother's nearest living relative. Technical reasons, Harry said. Yes. He decided the technical reason outweighed everything else. Yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. He was not, he found, particularly angry about this. He was interested in it, in what it meant about how Dumbledore thought, about what he would want, about what he would do next. Anger was less useful than understanding. He'll come here eventually, Harry said. Not through Fudge. Himself. I expect so, Serafina said. When he does, Harry said, I want to meet him. Not as a problem to be managed. I want to actually talk to him. He looked at his hands. He knew my mother. And I think he's probably very good at most things except for the things he's convinced himself are necessary, and I'd like to understand what those are before he's in the room. Serafina looked at him for a long moment. You sound, she said carefully, like someone preparing to negotiate rather than argue. Arguments don't resolve things, Harry said. They just establish positions. I don't want positions. I want to know what he's actually trying to do, because if his goal and my goal overlap, and I think they might, then fighting about jurisdiction is a waste of both our time. The Grand Matriarch was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then she said, your great-great-grandmother would have said almost exactly that. She said it simply, without sentimentality, as a statement of specific fact. Harry let that settle somewhere inside him. Not performing what it meant to him, just letting it be there. Late afternoon, Fleur found him on the eastern terrace where he'd taken to going when he needed to think without walls. He was leaning on the stone rail looking at the valley, which had gone amber in the declining light, and the mist was doing something beautiful in the low places that he watched without analysis. She stood beside him and didn't say anything immediately, which had become a comfortable mode between them. She'd stopped filling silences with him about 3 days ago, which he took as a compliment. Article 12, she said eventually. Yeah. You're right, she said. The original Veela language is unambiguous. Meridian's interpretation has been a deliberate misreading. Drax, or his legal team, has been using the French translation's ambiguity to sustain an argument that collapses in the source text. Harry nodded slowly. How do I handle it? Fleur looked at the valley. You could present it to the full council. Force a formal ruling that closes the interpretation gap. Drax loses face publicly and loses the blockage. She paused. Or I talk to Drax first, Harry said. Privately. Let him know I know, and give him the opportunity to drop the blockage without the public loss. Fleur turned her head to look at him. That's more generous than he deserves. Maybe, Harry said. But I need him functional. If I embarrass him in front of the council, he becomes an enemy who has to save face. If I talk to him privately, he becomes someone who owes me something. Fleur was quiet. The northern nations need those water rights, she said. It's not academic. There are communities, I know, Harry said. He'd read about it. He'd read everything Fleur gave him. That's why I want it resolved, not just one. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the valley. I'll arrange a meeting with Drax, she said. He won't expect you to come to him directly. Good, Harry said. That's the point. The light dropped further. The valley went from amber to rose to the first edge of purple. Somewhere in the court below them, Gabrielle was loudly explaining to someone about the falcon in the north tower, her voice carrying on the mountain air with total conviction. She's not wrong about the falcon, Harry said. I can feel it when I'm in the north corridor. Fleur made a sound. You can feel a falcon. I can feel things in the court, Harry said. It's the throne, I think. The connection. I'm still figuring out the range. What else can you feel? Fleur asked. He thought about it. All 14 directions, he said. All the time. Like, background awareness. The court itself very clearly. And, he paused. And? Something's wrong in Meridian, he said. Not political wrong. Magical wrong. The living magic there is different from the others. Thinner. Fleur went very still. How long have you been feeling that? Since the investiture. It was clearer after I sat the throne. He looked at her. Is that a known issue? Her face had done the thing where the recalibration was visible. The living magic weakening, she said slowly. We knew it was happening generally. We didn't know which nation was worst. She looked at him. You should tell Serafina. First thing tomorrow, Harry said. But not without knowing more. What can cause that, a thinning? What are we looking for? Fleur thought. Interference, she said. Someone working against the living magic deliberately. Or, a breach. A place where the magical boundary of the nation is compromised. Can you show me what to look for? Harry said. I can feel the direction. If you can tell me what the signature of a breach looks like magically, I think I might be able to narrow it down. She looked at him. There was a quality in her expression that he was becoming able to read, the specific look she had when she was about to say something that cost her effort. You're not, this isn't normal, she said. What you're describing. The awareness. The sensitivity to the living magic through the throne. It's supposed to develop. Gradually. Over years. I've had 4 days, Harry said. Exactly, Fleur said. 4 days. Harry looked at the valley. The throne was empty for 100 years, he said. I think it's been waiting for someone to talk to. Fleur let out a breath. It wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sigh, something between the two that had a quality of acceptance in it. She pushed away from the railing. Come on. I'll find the reference texts. You should eat first, you have the concentrating face again. She paused. Maman noticed too. Am I that obvious? Harry said. Only to people paying attention, Fleur said, and walked inside. Harry looked at the valley for one more moment. 14 directions, pulling gently, steady as breathing. The falcon in the north tower. The thin feeling from the southeast that meant meridian, that meant something was wrong and needed finding. The ministry letter answered and the investiture done and Fudge going home to report to Dumbledore. A lot of things in motion. He pushed off from the railing and went inside. Chapter 4, What Runs in the Blood. The meeting with Drax happened at 7 in the morning, 2 days after the ministry delegation left, in a small room off the western corridor that the court had apparently decided was appropriate for private conversations. It was warm, unadorned, containing exactly 1 table and 4 chairs and a window that looked onto the mountain's western face. Harry had asked Fleur to arrange it and she'd done so with the particular efficiency she applied to things she'd decided were worth her time. Drax arrived exactly on time, which told Harry something. A man who wanted to display contempt arrived late. A man who was genuinely curious arrived on time. He was bigger in a small room, broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that had probably been useful in many rooms over many years. He looked at the table, looked at the 2 chairs arranged on one side and the single chair on the other, and looked at Harry. He'd clearly expected a council member to be present, a buffer, something institutional between himself and a 10-year-old. Harry was alone. Sit down, Harry said. Thank you for coming. Drax sat. He had the careful composure of a man rearranging expectations in real time. I was told you wanted a direct conversation, he said. His French accent was heavier than most of the court's inhabitants. I was not told what about. The Northern Water Rights Renewal, Harry said. Specifically Article 12, Clause 4 of the original Veela Accord text. Not the French translation, the source language. Something happened in Drax's face. It was fast and controlled, but Harry had been watching faces his entire life and it was there, a tightening, a rapid inward recalculation, and underneath it something that was, interestingly, not quite guilt. More like the expression of someone who'd been playing a card they knew was weak and had always known the moment of reckoning was coming. I see, Drax said. The source language doesn't support Meridian's interpretation, Harry said. He wasn't unkind about it. He wasn't triumphant. He was just precise, the way Fleur was precise about things she'd verified. The ambiguity in the French translation has been the foundation of 3 years of blockage. That blockage ends. Drax was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was moving away from the careful political neutrality he'd walked in with and toward something more genuine. Not yet honest, but approaching it. You've been sovereign for less than a week, he said. Yes. And you've located a 3-year legal issue that my Council of Advisors has been managing. Your Council of Advisors has been sustaining it, Harry said. Not managing it. That's different. Drax sat back in his chair. He had the look of someone deciding how much to show. He chose more than Harry expected. Meridian has interests in the Northern Water allocation, he said. Real interests, not political. The reallocation that the rights renewal demands would reduce Meridian's access significantly. I know, Harry said. Drax looked at him. Not the specific numbers, Harry said. But I know Meridian isn't obstructing for sport. There's a real resource concern underneath the legal argument. He leaned forward slightly. Here's what I want to know. If I bring the Northern water rights to full council and close the legal interpretation gap, which I'm going to do, because the Northern communities genuinely need that water, what does Meridian actually need in return? Not the position you've been defending. The underlying thing. A long pause. Drax studied him. You're offering a negotiation. I'm offering a conversation before the negotiation, Harry said. The negotiation happens in front of the council. I'd rather know what's actually at stake before we get there. Drax was quiet for what felt like a full minute. The mountain outside the window was doing something beautiful with the early light, but neither of them were looking at it. Meridian has 11 farming communities on its southern border that depend on specific water table levels, Drax said finally. The reallocation as written reduces northern flow by 30%. That reduction, in a dry year, drops the southern water table below the threshold for reliable irrigation. We have done this, he pulled a breath, 7 times in the last century. We know the numbers. Harry nodded. He was building the picture in his head, resource geography, dependency lines, where the actual pressure points were. What would make the reallocation viable for Meridian? A guaranteed minimum allocation that protects the southern table, Drax said. Not the full 30% reduction. Something tiered, full allocation in wet years, protected floor in dry years. That's a workable modification, Harry said. Drax looked at him. You'd modify the renewal proposal. If the modification is fair and it resolves the blockage, yes. He met Drax's eyes directly. I'm not trying to win a fight with Meridian. I'm trying to get water to communities that need it and protect communities that are vulnerable. If a tiered model does both, that's better than forcing a binary. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences earlier in the conversation. Drax was not recalculating anymore. He was, Harry thought, simply looking. How old are you? Drax said. 10, Harry said. That hasn't changed since we started talking. Something shifted in Drax's expression, not quite a smile, not quite the opposite. My concern with your sovereignty, he said carefully, was not personal. I know, Harry said. You needed to know whether the throne was actually occupied or whether the seat was warm and the council was still running things. That's a legitimate question for the leader of the largest nation. Drax absorbed this. And your answer? The seat is occupied, Harry said simply. Another silence. Then Drax said, I will withdraw the formal reservation I filed, if the tiered model is incorporated into the renewal discussion. I'll incorporate it, Harry said. Drax stood. He was at the door when he stopped and turned back, and his expression had dropped the last of the political composition. Underneath it he was something Harry hadn't quite expected, tired, and serious, and carrying the weight of something he'd been carrying for a while. The living magic in Meridian, he said. You know something's wrong. Harry went still. I've known for 2 years, Drax said. We've kept it quiet because I didn't want the other nations to see Meridian as compromised. The largest nation showing weakness in its foundations. He paused. Whatever it is, it's been getting worse. Slowly. But steadily. I felt it, Harry said. From the throne. It's different from the other 13. Drax looked at him steadily. Then you understand why I needed to know whether the throne was actually occupied. Harry held that. Can I come to Meridian, he said. Not officially. Without the full sovereign protocol. Just to see what I'm feeling more clearly. Drax's eyes had a quality Harry recognized, the quality of a man who had been dealing with a problem alone for a long time and has just been unexpectedly offered help. Yes, he said. Whenever you wish. He left. Harry sat at the table for a moment and looked at the mountain. 7 days, he thought. He'd been here 7 days. He got up and went to find Fleur. She was in the library, which was where she usually was before 10 in the morning, surrounded by 3 texts and a collection of notes in her precise, slanted handwriting. She looked up when he came in and read his face immediately. "How did it go?" "Well," Harry said, taking the chair across from her. "He wants a tiered water allocation model in the renewal. Protect Meridian's southern water table in dry years, full reallocation in wet years." Fleur frowned, not at the idea, at the geometry of it. "That's workable," she said slowly. "The northern community's primary concern is dry year access. If Meridian's floor is set correctly, the wet year reallocation actually gives the northern communities more than the current proposal." "Yes," Harry said. "That's what I thought. Can you run the numbers? If there's a tiered threshold that works for both sides, I want to bring a complete proposal to the council rather than a concept." "I'll have it by afternoon," she said, already turning to her notes. Then she paused. "That's not all." "No." He told her about Meridian's living magic. About 2 years of Drax knowing and keeping it quiet. About the slow worsening. Fleur set her pen down. She had the expression she wore when something had moved from interesting to serious. "A breach," she said. "I said interference or a breach. If it's been 2 years and it's progressive, it's not natural degradation," Harry said. "I know what natural degradation feels like now. I've spent a week feeling it across all 14. He'd been learning the differences. Each nation had a distinct quality to its living magic, like different voices in a room. Meridian's had a wrongness to it that the others didn't. Something is actively pulling at it. Or blocking it. I can't tell which from here." "We need to go," Fleur said. "I asked Drax if I could visit." "What did he say?" "Yes." She nodded once, with the decisive efficiency that meant the conversation was over and planning had begun. "We'll need to tell Seraphina. And Maman, she'll insist on coming." "Good," Harry said. "Apollon should come. And I want to go without the formal protocol Drax mentioned. If there's someone doing this deliberately, I don't want to announce a sovereign visit a week in advance." Fleur looked at him for a moment. "You think it's deliberate?" 2 years, progressive, in the largest nation, Harry said. "The throne empty for a century, the living magic across all 14 weakening, and the most significant degradation is in the most powerful nation. That's not coincidence." Fleur was quiet. "There are people," she said carefully, "who would prefer the Veela nations to remain leaderless. Who have benefited from the fragmentation. Humans who trade in magical resources that are only available through weakened nation boundaries. And," she paused, "Veela who believe the Blood Throne itself was wrong to call a half-blood sovereign." Harry had been waiting for that to become explicit. It had been present at the edges since he arrived, a quality of unsaid thing in certain conversations, certain looks. "How organized is that faction?" he asked. Fleur's expression went somewhere complicated. "There's a man," she said. "I was going to tell you, I was trying to figure out when, and the right way." "Now is fine," Harry said. She looked at her notes for a moment, and then set them aside and looked at him directly. "His name is Cassius Vale. He's from the Vale Nation, one of the oldest of the 14. He's a full-blooded Veela warrior, exceptionally powerful, and he has spent the last 3 years arguing that the throne's silence meant it would call a full-blooded heir when it was ready, not a half-blood wizard." She paused. "He has followers. Not a majority, but significant numbers in 3 of the 14 nations. Does he know about me?" "Everyone knows about you," Fleur said. "The blood test results are public record. Your arrival has been, it's the political event of the century in Veela terms." She met his eyes. "He sent a formal letter to the council 3 days ago. I saw it because Mammon gets copies of all council correspondence." "What did it say?" "He challenged your right to the throne on grounds of blood purity and wants it put to a formal debate before the assembled nations." She paused. "The council declined to forward it to you." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Why?" Because you'd only been here 3 days and Therian thought, she was managing it, Harry said. Not angry. Just naming it accurately. Yes, Fleur said, with the honesty she consistently chose when she could have chosen diplomacy. Harry sat back and thought. Is Cassius Vale in the court? No. He's in Vale Nation. But there's a representative here, a woman named Sarah Vale, his cousin. She attended the throne room proceedings when Fudge came. Harry had noticed her, actually, fourth from the left in the observer seating, dark-haired, watching the ministry proceedings with an attention that was differently colored from everyone else's in the room. Measuring rather than witnessing. I need to see the letter, he said. I can get a copy, Fleur said. She was watching him. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, Harry said. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to let the council decide what I know about challenges to my sovereignty. Fleur nodded slowly. Therian was trying to protect you. I know, Harry said. And I need her to understand that I don't need information protected from me. I need information. All of it. He stood up. Fleur was already reaching for her pen, reverting to the numbers and the tiered water model, because that was how she worked, parallel tracks, everything moving at once. He appreciated that about her enormously. He was at the door when she said, without looking up, Harry. He stopped. The letter says he would accept a trial by sky, Fleur said. If the council wouldn't grant the debate. A formal challenge. She looked up. It's an ancient custom. A sovereign duel, conducted in open air. Witnessed by all nations. The outcome is, it's legally binding on the question of sovereignty. Harry looked at her. When you say the outcome is binding, if you lose, the throne passes to the challenger, she said. It came out straight, no softening. He respected that. If you win, she paused, well. Then you win. He thought about it. What does the trial actually involve? I don't know the specifics, Fleur said. It hasn't been invoked in over 200 years. She paused. Maman might know more. Serafina definitely does. I'll ask them, Harry said. Harry. Her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before, not concern exactly, more like something that had been existing in the background and was now making itself known. He's not, Cassius Vale is not a political opponent. He's genuinely dangerous. What he can do magically, tell me what you know about what he can do, Harry said. She looked at him steadily. You're not afraid of this, she said. It wasn't a question. Should I be, he said. A pause. Something in Fleur shifted. Probably, she said. But probably not as much as a normal person would be. She looked back at her notes. He controls weather. Directly, not through instruments, he can call specific atmospheric events. Lightning, wind shear, localized pressure systems. He's done it in conflict situations before. There are records. What else? Physical transformation, full Veela form. Most Veela can express it partially. He can go fully into it and sustain it, which is, she searched for the word, significant. The fully expressed Veela form amplifies magical output enormously. He's held it in recorded demonstrations for over an hour. Harry nodded slowly. He was building a picture. Not of an enemy, of a problem with specific dimensions that required specific approaches. Thank you, he said. I'll have the water numbers by afternoon, she said. I'll be with Serafina, he said. Send Gabrielle when you're ready. He was almost through the door. Send Gabrielle. Fleur said. She finds me faster than anyone else in this building, Harry said. I don't know how, but she does. From behind him, not quite under her breath, Fleur said something in French that sounded like that's because she's always following you, and Harry smiled as he walked down the corridor. Serafina had the letter. Harry walked into her tower room and she had it on her desk already, which meant she'd either known he was coming or had been waiting for this conversation since the letter arrived. He suspected both. He sat down across from her and held out his hand. She passed him the letter without preamble. It was in formal Veela script, which Harry could now read at about 80% comprehension through the throne connection, and the remaining 20 was supplied by context. The argument it made was sophisticated, he gave Cassius Vale credit for that. It didn't rely on simple blood supremacy language. It argued on historical grounds, that the Aureate bloodline's expression in a wizard family, diluted across multiple wizard blood generations, did not constitute the same sovereign mandate as an unbroken Veela lineage would. It cited 3 historical precedents, challenges to partially expressed blood claims in the 3rd century, in the 9th, and once in the 17th. It was the work of someone who had prepared carefully and believed his own argument. Harry read it twice. "He's not wrong about the historical precedents," he said. Seraphina looked at him. "No," she said. "He's not wrong about those. Where he's wrong is in the application. The blood test is not a partial expression." It was unambiguous. "He knows that," Harry said. "He's not making the blood argument in good faith. He's making it as a framework to demand the trial." "Yes." Harry set the letter down. "Tell me about the trial by sky." Seraphina was quiet for a moment. When she spoke carefully, choosing each word. "It is the oldest form of sovereign arbitration in Veela law. It exists for exactly this situation, a legitimate blood claim contested by a credible challenger. Neither the council nor any legal instrument can settle a trial challenge once it's formally invoked. The only resolution is the duel itself or the withdrawal of the challenge." "And he won't withdraw," Harry said. "No," Seraphina said. "He'll formally invoke it. The council will receive a second letter within a month, I expect. Possibly sooner, now that the investiture is complete." "What happens in the trial?" Harry said. "Specifically." Seraphina looked at him for a long moment. "It's conducted above the Aureate court. In open sky, witnessed from below by all assembled nations. There are 3 stages." She listed them with the precision of someone who had studied this for a long time. "The first sky, a test of magical range and control. Not combat. The sovereign and the challenger each demonstrate the scope of their power in open air. The assembled witnesses observe. The second stage is contact," Harry said. Something in the structure of it felt logical. "Combat, yes. Direct magical engagement, in flight, both participants must maintain altitude throughout. Neither can touch the ground. The third stage, if neither party has conceded after stage 2, is called the speaking. The challenger and the sovereign each address the assembled nations and make the case for their claim. The nations then collectively decide." She paused. "The speaking has decided fewer than a third of all trials in history. Most end in stage 1 or stage 2. What ended the last one?" Harry asked. "Stage 2, Seraphina said. The challenger was injured seriously enough to concede. She said it without drama, as fact. Cassius Vale is not going to concede easily." "No," Harry said. "But I'm also not going to concede at all." He said it the way he'd said everything this week, not dramatically, just accurately, stating a thing that was true. Seraphina looked at him. "You'd accept the challenge?" "If it's formally invoked, yes." "Harry." It was the first time she'd used his name without the formal weight of sovereign implied around it. Just his name, in the voice of someone who had been careful not to be parental and was now briefly abandoning that caution. "He is a full-blooded Veela warrior who has been practicing combat magic since before you were born and who can fully transform and sustain it for an hour." "I know," Harry said. "Fleur told me." "And?" Harry thought about the training terrace, about the mist lifting in the valley. About the fire in his palm burning without fuel. About the throne sound that had become a chord since the investiture, a full resonance that he was learning to move in rather than simply feel. About 14 directions that he could feel constantly, the living magic running through him now like something he'd always had and only just started using. I have advantages he doesn't know about, Harry said. And I learn fast. Seraphina looked at him for a long time. Then, very quietly, she said, yes. You do. She leaned back in her chair. We have time before the formal invocation. Use it. I will, Harry said. I want to go to Meridian. Quietly, without full protocol. I need to understand the living magic issue there before it becomes a crisis. It's already been 2 years. Drax agreed. Yes. He paused. He's been carrying it alone because he was afraid showing weakness would undermine Meridian's position. Seraphina closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she had the expression of a woman absorbing a consequence she'd feared. How bad is it? Bad enough that I can feel it from here, Harry said. Which means it's urgent. He paused. I want to go this week. Before the veil situation becomes formal. Seraphina nodded. Take Apollon. And Fleur, she knows the living magic literature better than anyone her age has a right to. A pause. And take Counselor Therian. I will, Harry said. But I need to talk to Therian first. He left and went to find her. He found Therian in her office, which was a room of absolute order, every document in its place, everything deliberate, nothing accidental. She looked up when he came in, read his expression, and set down her pen. The veil letter, she said. Yes, Harry said. He sat across from her. I need you to understand something, Counselor, and I need to say it directly so there's no ambiguity. Therian folded her hands on the desk. Waiting. I need all information, Harry said. Not the information the Council decides I'm ready for. Everything. Challenges to my sovereignty, political movements against the throne, issues with the living magic, disputes between nations, everything that comes through this court that has any bearing on my role as sovereign. He held her gaze. I know you held the veil letter because you were protecting me. I know you've had 7 days to assess me and you weren't sure what I could handle. I'm telling you now, I can handle it. All of it. What I cannot handle is being managed. Do you understand the difference? Therian was very still. Then, yes, she said. I'm not angry about the letter, Harry said. I'm telling you this so it doesn't happen again. It won't, she said. Not a defensive statement, a clean, simple commitment. He nodded. Thank you. Now, I'm going to Meridian this week. I need you to come. And I need to formally request, through your office, that the water rights renewal discussion be moved to a full council session next week. Fleur is working on a tiered modification proposal that I think resolves the blockage. Therian's expression had moved through something during the previous exchange, not quite chastened, more like recalibrated in the same direction Drax and Fudge and Fleur had all recalibrated since his arrival. She picked up her pen. I'll arrange the council session, she said. And I'll prepare for Meridian. How are we traveling? I was going to ask you the same question, Harry said. Quietly, but quickly. I know a route, she said. 1 day's travel, minimal exposure. We leave the day after tomorrow. Harry stood. He was at the door when he said, Therian. The formal invocation of the trial by sky, when it comes, I want to be in the room when the council receives it. A long pause. Understood, she said. That evening, the council meeting where Harry formally presented the water rights modification happened before an audience of 12 household heads, and it went the way things tended to go when he walked into a room having done the preparation and knowing what he was talking about. Fleur's numbers were exact. The tiered threshold she'd calculated gave the northern communities reliable dry year access at 92% of their requested allocation, and gave Meridian a protected floor that their southern communities could sustain indefinitely. Harry laid it out simply, without performance, and answered the 3 technical questions that came from the council clearly and completely, and when Drax confirmed Meridian support, the room went through a quality of surprised quiet that Harry was beginning to recognize as the sound of things falling into place. The water rights renewal passed unanimously. Renaud, who had opposed the co-regency motion and voted for it anyway, said nothing during the meeting. But at the end, as people were rising and beginning to filter out, he stopped beside Harry's chair and said, quietly, the tiered model was elegant. Harry looked up at him. Fleur did the calculations, he said. I had the concept. She made it viable. Renaud looked at him for a moment. Then he inclined his head, small, precise, the gesture of a man with very specific standards for when deference was warranted. He walked out. Harry sat in the emptying chamber and let the weight of the day move through him. 8 days. He'd been here 8 days. Fleur came and sat in the chair next to him. Not the formal delegation arrangement, just sat, turned sideways in the chair, one knee up, which was the most informal he'd ever seen her. Renaud said something to you, she said. He said the tiered model was elegant, Harry said. Fleur made a sound. He almost never says that. I told him it was your calculations. She looked at him. Something in her expression did the thing it had been doing for days, the slow movement from reserve to something warmer, imperfectly hidden because she was trying not to feel it too obviously. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Harry said. It was true. They sat there in the emptying chamber, and outside the mountain evening was doing something spectacular with the light, and somewhere in the court Gabrielle was conducting her nightly report to Apollon about the falcon, which had apparently acquired a name, and the living magic moved through the walls more easily than it had a week ago, and Harry sat next to Fleur Delacour in a chair in the Aureate court and felt, for the first time in his memory, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. It was a strange feeling. He didn't know what to do with it yet. He let it exist. Tell me more about Cassius Vale, he said. Everything you know. His history, his specific techniques, what he's done in recorded demonstrations. I want to understand him. Fleur looked at the window. Then she said, he grew up in Vale Nation, which is the oldest of the 14 and the most traditional. His family has been arguing for a return to pre-accord governance, pure Veela rule, no compromises with the wizard world, for generations. He's not driven by cruelty. He genuinely believes the throne should be held by a full-blooded Veela and that the bloodline's extension into wizard families was a contamination that the throne was wrong to honor. She paused. He has a daughter. She's 7. Her name is Lise. He's doing all of this partly for her, I think, or his version of the future she would inherit. Harry took this in. He's not wrong to want a good future for his daughter, he said. No, Fleur said. He's just wrong about what that future looks like, Harry said. And about how you build it. Fleur looked at him. Can you tell that, from 8 days? Harry thought about Meridian's broken living magic and 14 directions pulling gently in his chest and the water rights renewal and Renaud's small precise nod. I know that the living magic across all 14 nations has been weakening because the throne was empty, he said. And I know it's been steadier since I sat it. That's not about blood purity. That's about the sovereign connection being functional again. A full-blooded Veela who sat the throne 100 years ago and then walked away, he stopped. That's not what Cassius is proposing, Fleur said. I know, Harry said. But the throne doesn't care about purity. It cared about blood right. It called the blood it called. He can want it to have been different but he can't make it be different. He paused. What I can do is make sure the future he wants for his daughter is actually possible under the sovereignty that exists. If he can see that, the challenge goes away. And if he can't? Harry met her eyes. Then we do the trial by sky. Fleur held his gaze for a moment. You really aren't afraid of him. I'm afraid of the things I don't know yet, Harry said honestly. I'm going to spend the time before the invocation learning them. That's what I can control. She nodded slowly. There was a quality in her expression now that had nothing left of the careful reserve from the first day, the day she'd assessed him from the gate pillar and found him smaller than expected. It had been replaced by something that was still analytical. She was always analytical, but that had something else running underneath it. Something that looked, when he caught it in the right light, a little like trust. "All right," she said. "Meridian first. Trial later." She uncurled from the chair. "Come on." Gabrielle named the falcon. "You should know what she named it." Harry stood. "What did she name it?" "Pierre," Fleur said. He stared at her. "She said it looked like a Pierre," Fleur said, already heading for the door. "Don't ask me to explain." Harry followed her out of the chamber and through the corridors of the Aureate court, which moved for them as it always did, warm and present and alive, and the living magic ran steadily through its walls like a river that had found its depth again after a long, hollow century of shallow water. In Meridian, something was wrong and getting worse, and in Vale Nation a man who loved his daughter was sharpening a challenge he'd been waiting a long time to make, and in London Cornelius Fudge was writing a report for a man in half-moon glasses who would read it with great care, and in the north tower of the Aureate court a falcon named Pierre was conducting his affairs with complete indifference to all of the above. Harry thought about all of it as he walked. Tomorrow, Meridian. He was ready. Chapter 5, 14 Nations. One storm. Meridian was 6 hours south of the Aureate court by the route Therion knew, which involved 2 transit points through the living magic network, places where the ancient Veela pathways intersected and could be stepped through if you knew the specific orientation, the way you could find a door in a wall by running your hand along it until the surface gave. Harry felt both transit points before Therion indicated them, which made her do the small eyebrow movement that was her version of being visibly surprised. They arrived in Meridian at midday. It was different from the court's mountains. Meridian occupied a wide valley in what would have been, on any non-magical map, unremarkable southern French countryside, rolling hills, old stone villages, vineyards in long organized rows on the slopes. But the Veela presence ran through it like a current, visible in the quality of the light, in the way the air moved with slightly more intention than wind could account for, in the particular richness of the colors, greens more saturated, stone walls carrying a faint warm luminescence. Except. Harry felt at the moment they stepped through the second transit point. The wrongness he'd been sensing from the court was sharper here, not distant and directional but present, immediate, like a sound that was almost a frequency you could hear. He stopped walking. Apollon stopped beside him. "You feel it," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "Where's Drax meeting us?" "The Meridian Estate House is a mile north." Therion was scanning the valley with the careful attention of someone who had been doing threat assessment for decades. "We should keep moving." They moved. Drax met them at the edge of his estate's grounds, a broad expanse of land that sat above the valley floor, old enough to have grown into the landscape rather than sitting on it, the main house low and long and the same pale stone as the court but warmer, terracotta-toned, covered in something that wasn't quite ivy but performed the same architectural function. He'd brought 2 of his senior advisors, which Harry noted but didn't remark on. Everyone brought their own version of reinforcement. The handshake Drax offered was different from the careful political gesture of the small room off the western corridor. He gripped Harry's hand with the directness of someone operating outside the performance now. "It's worse this week," he said, without preamble. "Show me," Harry said. Drax took them south from the estate house, down into the valley, to a place where the hills made a shallow bowl and 3 old trees stood in a configuration that was clearly not accidental, planted with intention, oriented to some geometry that wasn't architectural. He stopped between them. "Here," he said. Harry stood between the trees and closed his eyes. The living magic network was something he'd spent the past week learning to read through the throne connection, not actively, the way you'd read a document, but passively, the way you heard a conversation in a room. Each nation had a signature. Meridian's was copper-warm, broad, substantial, the signature of the largest nation with the deepest roots. He'd felt that through the throne from the court. But here, standing in the actual place, in the living tissue of the nation itself, he could feel where the copper warmth was thin. Not in one spot, in a network of spots, hairline gaps in something that should have been continuous. Like a wall where the mortar between the stones had been slowly removed. Deliberately removed. It's not degradation, Harry said, eyes still closed. It's extraction. No one spoke. He opened his eyes and looked at Drax. Something is pulling the living magic out. Not fast enough to be obvious in a short period, but consistent. 2 years of slow extraction. He looked at the trees, at the geometry between them. These are anchor points for the network. What are they connected to? Drax glanced at his advisors. One of them, an older woman with the look of someone who had spent her life studying exactly this kind of problem, stepped forward. The trees are boundary markers, she said. The Meridian network has 47 of them, arranged in an 8-kilometer circuit. They hold the shape of the nation's living magic, maintain its pressure. What happens if you breach the circuit? Harry said. She hesitated. If the circuit is broken at enough points, the pressure drops, Harry said. The living magic starts to leak out at the gaps. Slowly at first, then faster as each gap creates pressure differential that stresses the next nearest point. He looked at the trees. How many points are compromised? The woman looked at Drax. Drax looked at Harry. We don't know the exact number, he said. Then we need to find out, Harry said. He looked at Fleur. The anchor geometry, if the points are compromised in a pattern, that pattern will tell us something about the method. Fleur was already thinking. I need a map of the 47 points, she said, to Drax's advisor. And any record of when the degradation was first noticed at each location. The advisor produced, from the bag she was carrying, a rolled document that she'd clearly brought specifically because she'd hoped someone would ask for exactly this. She handed it to Fleur and Fleur unrolled it and they both crouched over it immediately with the focused energy of two people for whom a complicated problem was primarily interesting. Harry looked at the trees for another moment. He reached out, not physically, and touched the living magic of the nearest anchor point through the throne connection. It was like putting your hand into water and feeling the temperature gradient, here, warm and present, 10 centimeters further, noticeably cooler, further still, barely there at all. And at the edge of the barely there, something else. A faint trace. Something that had touched the living magic here, repeatedly, from outside. He withdrew and turned to Apollon. Can you feel magical signatures? Old ones, faint. Apollon looked at him carefully. With concentration. What am I looking for? Something that's been touching the anchor points, he said. Not Veela magic. Something else. She looked at the tree. She stepped toward it and placed her hand on the bark and was very still for a moment, and her expression moved through concentration into something more specific. Then she looked at Harry with an expression he hadn't quite seen from her before, the expression of someone who has just confirmed a fear they hoped was unfounded. Dark magic, she said quietly. Old. Very controlled. Not wild, precise. She pulled her hand from the bark. Someone who knows what they're doing. Drax had gone still in the way large men went still when they were controlling a reaction. You're sure, he said to Apollon. Not a challenge. A man hoping to be told he'd misheard. Yes, Apollon said. Harry looked at the map Fleur had spread. She was tracing something with her finger, moving between marked points in a pattern. Harry, she said. He went and crouched beside her. She pointed. The degradation isn't random. Look, it's highest at these 7 points. She traced the 7. And these 7 form a sub-circuit. Not the full 47, a specific sector. The southwest quadrant. Harry looked at the sub-circuit. Thought about what was in the southwest quadrant of Meridian's valley. Then thought about what was adjacent to it, what shared that border. He looked up at Drax. What's on the southwest boundary of Meridian? Drax looked at the map. His jaw tightened. The Vale border crossing, he said. The valley was very quiet. It doesn't mean Cassius Vale is personally responsible, Apollon said carefully, because she was the kind of person who said that kind of thing carefully. No, Harry agreed. But someone who has access to the Vale side of that border, who knows Veela anchor geometry well enough to work on it precisely and quietly for 2 years, and who has a political interest in demonstrating that the throne's authority is insufficient to protect the nations, he let that trail off. Drax said something in French that was clearly not diplomatic language. Tharian's expression didn't change, which was itself a kind of judgment. I need to see the boundary, Harry said. Harry, Apollon began. Not to confront anyone, Harry said. To look. He stood. Fleur, come with me. Tharian, stay with Drax. If this becomes a formal international incident, you need to be here for how that's handled. He paused. Apollon, I'd like you to come if you're willing. Obviously, Apollon said, with a precision that suggested she found it, if you're willing, slightly unnecessary. The southwest border of Meridian was a low ridge of old stone wall, more ancient than anyone's reliable records, following the natural contour of the land in a way that suggested it had been placed to follow something invisible rather than something geographical. On the Meridian side the grass was rich and deep-rooted. On the Vale side it was the same, but through the throne connection Harry could feel the different signature. Vale's living magic was spice-warm, dense, carrying the particular quality of the oldest nation. He stood at the wall and looked at the point where the 7th compromised anchor should be. A tree, old and substantial, growing on the Meridian side with its roots presumably running under the wall. He put his hand on the bark. The trace was stronger here. The dark magic that Apollon had caught was clearer, fresher. More recent activity. He followed it, not physically but through the connection, running along the thread of foreign magic that had been pressed into the living network at this point, back through the wall, into Vale territory, 100 meters or so, and then, he stopped. There's something buried, he said. On the Vale side. About 100 meters in from the wall. Something actively working against the network. Fleur was very still beside him. An artifact, she said. What kind of artifact does this? Harry said. Theoretically, she was thinking as she spoke, a null stone. A specific kind of carved object that, when placed at the correct point relative to a living magic network, creates a sustained drain. They're extremely old, extremely difficult to make, and they're illegal under the Accord. She paused. I've only ever read about them in historical texts. I didn't think anyone still knew how to make them. Harry looked through the wall at where it was buried. He could feel it now clearly, a cold specific point of intentional wrongness, like a hole in the middle of something whole. How do I stop it? Fleur looked at him. You can't just, it's not a matter of breaking the object. Null stones work because they're attuned to the specific frequency of the network they're draining. If you destroy it wrong, the backlash could damage the anchor point further. She was thinking rapidly. You need to disconnect it from the network first. Sever its attunement. Then it's just an object. How do you sever the attunement? You run a stronger frequency through the network at that point, she said slowly. Overwhelm the drain. The null stone is attuned to Meridian's specific signature, she stopped. But I'm connected to all 14, Harry said. She looked at him. If you ran the full sovereign connection through that anchor point, it would be louder than the null stone's frequency, Harry said. Theoretically, Fleur said. Harry, this is completely untested, but logical, he said. Yes, she said. But, stand back, he said. Harry, Apollon, he said. If something goes wrong, what's the worst-case outcome? Apollon had been listening with the expression she wore when she was computing risk. If the null stone backlashes incorrectly, the nearest anchor point could fail entirely. The southwest sector might degrade significantly. She paused. For you personally, the sovereign connection running at full output through a compromised point, I don't know. It hasn't been done. But the anchor point failing is the worst-case outcome, Harry said. And the null stone is already doing that. Slowly. Apollon was quiet. Then, yes. Then the worst-case outcome of trying is the same as the worst-case outcome of not trying, Harry said. Except if it works, we fix it. Apollon looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at Harry. I hate that that's a coherent argument, Fleur said. He put his hand back on the tree and found the anchor point, found the compromised place, the thin thread of Meridian's copper-warm living magic running through it like water through a damaged pipe. He could feel the null stone on the other side, cold and deliberate, pulling. He breathed. He reached for all 14. It was enormous. Not painful. Just enormous. The way standing at the edge of a cliff was enormous, the full scope of it suddenly visceral rather than abstract. All 14 directions, all 14 signatures, the court's own resonance at the center, he gathered them together the way you gathered scattered light with a lens, focused them, and ran them through the anchor point like a chord played at full volume. The null stone fought it for 3 seconds. He could feel it, the cold thing on the other side, precisely constructed and deeply set, pushing back. He didn't force harder. He steadied. Held the cord. Let it be larger than the null stone rather than fighting it. The cold thing went silent. Snapped, clean. Disconnected from the network. A dead object in the ground, attuned to a frequency that was no longer available to it because the frequency had been replaced by something it wasn't built to handle. Harry took his hand off the tree and breathed. The living magic at the anchor point was whole. Not perfect, not fully recovered, 2 years of slow drainage didn't reverse in 30 seconds. But whole. The gap in the mortar filled. The pressure restored at this point. Fleur was staring at him. Apollon had her hand over her mouth. That worked, Fleur said. Yes, Harry said. He was very tired. Not dangerously, more like the pleasantly spent feeling of the fudge meeting, but deeper. He breathed through it. We need to find the other 6 compromised points and do the same thing. And then we need to find the null stone before someone else activates it. The null stone is Veil territory, Apollon said carefully. I know, Harry said. That's a problem for later. Right now, he looked at the tree, 6 more anchor points. It took 3 hours. They moved through the southwest sector of Meridian with Drax's advisor's map, finding each compromised point, and Harry stood at each one and ran the cord and disconnected the null stone on the Veil side. By the 6th he was significantly tired. By the 7th he was sitting down between each attempt, which Apollon watched with the carefully modulated concern of someone who was not going to tell him to stop because she understood why he wasn't going to, but was doing the assessment anyway. When it was done he sat on a slope above the last anchor tree and looked at the valley and felt Meridian's living magic moving more freely, not fully healed, days or weeks would tell what the recovery rate was, but free of the drain, the gap sealed, the circuit restored. Fleur sat beside him. She handed him water and bread from the bag she'd brought, practical creature, Fleur Delacour, always prepared for the physical requirements of whatever situation developed, and he drank and ate and they sat in the afternoon quiet of the Meridian Valley together. 7 null stones, she said. 7. Someone spent considerable time and expertise placing those. And they'll know they've been disconnected, Harry said. Whoever it is. They'll feel the network pressure restore. Yes, Fleur said. Good, Harry said. She looked at him sideways. Good. Now they know I know, he said. And now they know what I can do. He looked at the sky, late afternoon, the light going long and amber over the valley. If this is connected to the trial challenge, it has to be, Fleur said. Then whoever placed those stones was betting that by the time I became sovereign, the living magic damage would be bad enough to undermine confidence in the throne. The narrative being, look how the living magic fails even with a sovereign seated. The throne's choice was wrong. He ate the last of the bread. But we found it early and fixed it. That narrative doesn't work anymore. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're good at this." He glanced at her. "At what specifically?" "At seeing what people are actually doing," she said. "Underneath what they're saying they're doing. You do it with Renault, with Drax, with Fudge, and now," she gestured at the valley. "The whole thing. What someone was trying to build. You see the architecture of it." Harry was quiet for a moment. "I learned to do that at Privet Drive," he said. "If you can't predict what people actually want, you can't stay out of the way of it." Fleur looked at him. It was a long look, the kind she'd been giving him more frequently over the past week, the kind that was its own form of recalibration, moving past the version of him she'd assembled on day one towards something more accurate. "I'm sorry you had to learn it that way," she said. He shrugged. It was genuine, not performative, not the shrug of someone minimizing their experience, but of someone who had processed a thing and put it somewhere they could carry it without it carrying them. "It's useful," he said. "So." She looked at the valley. "So," she agreed. They came back to Drax's estate house in the early evening and Harry told Drax what they'd found and what they'd done, sitting at the long kitchen table with Therion and Apollon and Drax's advisors, laying it out plainly. The Null Stones. The southwest border. The Vale territory. Drax's expression moved through several things. Anger, yes, but underneath the anger something more specific. The particular fury of a man who has been victimized carefully and quietly and has not been able to do anything about it because he didn't know it was happening. "If I bring this to the council, it becomes an internation incident that Cassius Vale can frame as an aggressive accusation," Harry said. "Before we have the Null Stone itself as physical evidence." Drax looked at him. "What do you want to do?" "I want to retrieve the Null Stone," Harry said. "From the Vale side of the border." "That's," Therion began. "I know," Harry said. "It's technically a border crossing without Vale permission." He looked at her. "What are my rights as sovereign regarding internation investigations?" Therion was quiet for 3 seconds. Article 19 of the Accord gives the sovereign investigative access to all nations' territories in cases of demonstrated harm to the living magic network, she said slowly. "The demonstration of harm is 7 null stones in a compromised anchor circuit," Harry said. "And my direct testimony as sovereign that I felt and remediated the damage." Another pause. "That is a demonstration of harm," Therion said. "Article 19 would apply." "Then I'm not crossing the border without permission," Harry said. "I'm exercising Article 19 sovereign investigative rights." Therion looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her expression, not quite pride, but its structural relative. "I'd like to accompany you," she said. "I was going to ask," Harry said. They went the next morning, early, before the light was full. Harry, Therion, Apollon, and Fleur. Drax had wanted to come but Harry had asked him, directly and with a clear explanation of why, to remain at the estate. This was not a political confrontation. It was an investigation. Drax's presence would make it territorial. His absence kept it sovereign. Drax had agreed, which told Harry that the previous day's work had moved Drax from grudging political engagement into something considerably closer to actual trust. The Null Stone was where Harry had felt it from the meridian side, buried about 40 centimeters down in the earth 100 meters from the wall, concealed under a flat stone that looked entirely natural unless you knew to look for intentional placement. Therion dug it out with the focused care of someone who had handled dark objects before and knew the specific etiquette. It was the size of a large egg, carved from something that looked like obsidian but wasn't quite. It had a quality of wrongness to it that was tactile rather than visual, the feeling of a thing that had been made to do damage. It also had a maker's mark. Therion held it up in the early light and looked at the mark pressed into its base, a symbol in Old Veela script. She looked at it for a long moment. Her expression was controlled but Harry caught the tightening around her eyes. You recognize it, he said. It's a family mark, Varian said. Old Vale family sigil. One of the 3 senior families. Which one? She looked at him. Not Cassius Vale's direct line, she said. His uncle's family. Harry absorbed this. So it might not be Cassius directly. Or it might be Cassius through a deliberately indirect chain, Varian said. Plausible separation. Harry looked at the null stone. He thought about Cassius Vale, the sophisticated legal letter, the careful historical argument, the formal challenge structure. The man was methodical. Organized. Not someone who did sloppy work. He knew we might trace this eventually, Harry said. He built distance into it. Yes, Varian said. So proving his direct involvement will be difficult. Very. Harry looked at the stone. That's all right, he said. I don't need to prove it in a council chamber. I need him to know that I know. The trial will tell the rest. He straightened. He looked at the 3 women standing in the early Vale morning, Varian with her controlled fury held precisely back, Apollon watching him with the warm steady attention she'd given him since the first breakfast, Fleur with her expression doing the thing it did now, the thing she thought she was better at hiding than she was. Can we bring the null stone as evidence? He asked Varian. Yes, she said. It's now material to an Article 19 investigation. Good. He looked at the wall behind them, the meridian border. Let's go back. I have a letter to write. To whom? Apollon asked. To Cassius Vale, Harry said. The letter was not long. Harry wrote it himself, in the Veela script he'd been learning through the Throne connection, which was now fluent enough for formal correspondence even if not for literature. He had Fleur review it for accuracy. She made 2 corrections, both technical, and gave it back without comment on the content, which he took as endorsement. The letter said, I know about the null stones. I have retrieved the physical evidence and it is in the court's custody. I know the family mark. I have remediated all 7 anchor points in Meridian's southwest circuit. I am telling you this directly rather than through the council because I prefer honest conversations to political theater. If you believe the throne chose wrongly, the trial by sky is your right and I will meet you in it when you invoke it. If you believe the throne chose correctly and your challenge has been about something else, about ensuring the nations are led by someone capable of protecting them, then I want you to know that the answer to that question is in what I did in Meridian yesterday. Come to the court. Speak to me before you invoke the trial. That invitation stands for 30 days. He sealed it and had Therian's office send it through the formal diplomatic channel. Then he went to dinner, because Gabrielle had apparently convinced the kitchen to make something specifically for his return from Meridian and it would be extremely rude not to show up. The letter from Cassius Vale arrived on the 9th day of Harry's time at the court. 9 days since Privet Drive. 9 days since the bowl turned gold. The letter said, the trial by sky is formally invoked. 30 days. Harry read it. Set it down. Picked up his fork and finished the breakfast Apollon had put in front of him. Then he looked up. Fleur was watching him across the table. Gabrielle was watching him. Apollon was watching him, her hands still around her coffee cup. 30 days, Harry said. He's taking the full period. He's preparing, Fleur said. So am I, Harry said. Starting today. He looked at Apollon. I need you to tell me everything about the trial by sky that you know. Everything the texts say. Everything anyone who was present at the last one has passed down. He looked at Fleur. I need you to help me understand the full Veela form, what it is, how it works, what it does to magical output. Not because I'm going to express it the same way, I don't know if I can, but because I need to understand what I'm going to be facing. Fleur nodded. I can do that. And I need to understand the first sky stage, Harry said. Range and control demonstration. I want to know what the historical benchmarks are, what sovereign performances have looked like in the past, what the witnesses are actually evaluating. I know the records, Apollon said. I'll find the texts. Good, Harry said. He looked at Gabrielle, who was watching him with the enormous blue eyes and the angelic composure. And I need Pierre to be available, he said. For morale. Gabrielle's face did something extraordinary. He's always available, she said firmly. He lives here. Right, Harry said. Then we're set. He stood up. He could feel all 14 directions. He could feel Meridian, now clean and recovering, its copper-warm signature moving more freely than it had in 2 years. He could feel Vale to the southeast, dense and old and carrying the particular weight of a nation with a challenge just formally invoked. He could feel the Aureate court around him, its pale amber stones warm and present, the living magic running through it like blood. He walked out onto the eastern terrace and looked at the sky. 30 days. He thought about the first sky stage, range and control, in open air, witnessed by thousands. He thought about what he'd done in the Meridian Valley with all 14 nations running through the network at once. He reached for the warm, the way he had on his first morning in the training hall with Fleur watching. Not carefully this time. Not the gentle thermal that had lifted the valley mist. He reached for all 14. The sky above the eastern terrace went gold. Not cloud cover, the actual light, the quality of the light, shifting as the living magic of 14 nations moved through the air around him and expressed itself as something visible. A man standing at the gate of the Aureate court 200 meters away stopped walking and looked up. A bird changed course around the column of altered air. Harry held it for 10 seconds, steady and clear, and then let it go. The sky went back to ordinary Camargue blue. He stood there breathing. 30 days. He heard footsteps behind him. He knew the rhythm of them. The gate guard is going to have something to report, Fleur said, coming to stand beside him. Good, Harry said. Let Vale Nation hear about it. She was quiet. Then, you're going to win the first sky easily, she said. You know that. Probably, Harry said. But I'm going to win it brilliantly, not just easily. I want the nations watching to see something they remember. Fleur looked at the sky. The second sky is the problem, she said. Yes, Harry said. Tell me about combat in the air. Everything you know. Start with the basics. She started talking. He listened, the way he always listened, completely, building the picture, asking questions at the precise moments where the picture needed more detail. Below them the Camargue Valley went about its morning and the court breathed and the living magic moved, and somewhere in Vale Nation a man who loved his daughter was sharpening a skill he'd spent 30 years developing. Harry had 30 days. He intended to use every one of them. The days moved fast. Mornings in the training hall with Fleur, who turned out to be a genuinely gifted teacher when she was teaching something she cared about, and she cared about this with an intensity that Harry suspected had some component beyond the purely pedagogical but didn't name because naming it would probably make her stop. He learned aerial magic in theory, the specific challenges of maintaining output while maintaining altitude, the way the open sky affected magical range, the particular dynamics of combat when neither participant had the ground to brace against. He couldn't practice actual flight yet. That was Veela magic, and whether he could access it was an open question that he set aside rather than worrying about. There were things he could do that were adjacent, the thermal displacement, the large-scale atmospheric manipulation. He practiced range first, then precision, then the two together. Afternoons with Serafina and Apollon, working through trial records, 3 complete historical accounts of trials by sky that had been documented in detail, one of which Apollon had found in an archive that hadn't been fully catalogued since the 19th century. The last documented trial had been 212 years ago. The sovereign had won. Harry read the account 3 times and noticed things on the third read that he hadn't seen on the first, which was usually how it went. Evenings with Gabrielle, because Gabrielle had appointed herself as the unofficial guardian of his equilibrium and enforced this by showing up wherever he was with food and completely irrelevant observations about Pierre's behavior, and it was, Harry had discovered, extremely effective. You couldn't maintain relentless focus in Gabrielle's company because Gabrielle simply didn't allow it, and it turned out that an hour of not maintaining relentless focus made the next morning's focus considerably sharper. He spoke to Serafina about it on the 11th day. She does it on purpose, he said. Gabrielle. She knows what she's doing. Serafina looked at him. Of course she does, she said. She's 8, not simple. Harry thought about this. She's going to be remarkable, he said. Yes, Serafina agreed. She already is. On the 15th day a second Veela Delegation representative arrived at the court, not Sarah Veil, who was still present, but a senior political figure from the Veil nation's formal governance, a woman named Councilwoman Oat. She requested a meeting with Harry, which he granted. She came to the throne room. He received her formally, but without the full assembly, just Therian and Apollon as council representation, and Fleur standing to his right as she'd stood since the investiture. Oat was perhaps 55, precise, with the quality of someone who had spent her life in political rooms and had gotten exceptionally good at reading them. She looked at Harry in the throne and did her own version of recalibration, small, quick, professional. The Veil Nation, she said, does not officially endorse the trial challenge. Cassius Veil invoked it in his capacity as a private citizen and challenge holder under the Accord. The nation's governance takes no position. I understand, Harry said. We do, however, have concerns about the Nullstone investigation, she said. The family mark you identified is a matter of complexity. Complex how? Harry said. The mark belongs to the Veilcaster family, which is Cassius Veil's uncle's branch, she said. Cassius himself has not used that mark since he and his uncle disagreed politically, 15 years ago. The estrangement is documented. She met his eyes. We are not saying he's innocent. We are saying the evidence is not simple. Harry looked at her for a moment. Who in the Veilcaster family would have the expertise to make a nullstone? A pause. The family mark alone could be applied by anyone with access to the sigil. It doesn't require the family's involvement. Harry held that. You're telling me the mark could have been placed deliberately to frame the connection. I'm telling you the evidence is not simple, Oat repeated. Her eyes were direct. She was, Harry thought, telling him something without saying it, giving him information in the shape of a disclaimer. He thought about it. Someone placed 7 nullstones in a specific location to damage Meridian's living magic and used a Veil family mark on them, he said slowly. The primary beneficiary of Meridian's weakening, if it progressed to the point of visible failure, would be the argument that the throne can't protect the nations. That argument benefits Cassius Veil's challenge. He paused. But it's also possible that someone who wants the challenge to happen, who wants the political disruption that follows a trial, placed the stones and framed the Veilcaster connection to ensure the situation escalated. Oat was very still. Who benefits from the escalation itself? Harry said. Not from either outcome of the trial, but from the trial happening at all. 14 nations focused on a sovereignty dispute are 14 nations not focused on other things. Oat looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, that is a more sophisticated question than I expected to be asked today. Can you answer it? Harry said. Not here, she said. Not formally. She held his gaze. But it is the right question. She left. Harry sat in the throne and looked at the middle distance and thought about whoever had placed the null stones and what they wanted and whether they would make another move before the trial, and what form that move would take. Fleur stepped forward from her position. You think there's a third party, she said. Maybe, Harry said. Or I think Cassius Veil is more complicated than a man who places null stones and then invites scrutiny with a formal legal letter. He looked at her. Someone who wrote that letter wouldn't leave a family mark on a null stone. It's not the same level of sophistication. Fleur was quiet. What do we do? We prepare for the trial, Harry said. Because it's happening regardless of who placed the stones. And we pay attention to anything else that moves in the next 15 days. On the 20th day, a letter arrived from Britain. Not from the ministry. From Albus Dumbledore. It was warm, careful, precisely worded, and it asked, with the particular kind of gracious simplicity that contained enormous complexity underneath, if Harry might be willing to receive a visitor. Harry read it twice. Then he wrote back, yes. After the trial. He sent it before he'd quite consciously decided to and found, when he thought about it, that he was content with the decision. Dumbledore could wait. Everything in its order. On the 28th day, Sarah Vale, who had been present in the court as observer for nearly 3 weeks, appeared at the training hall at 6 in the morning. Harry was there alone. Fleur didn't arrive until 7, working on atmospheric manipulation at range, which was the thing he'd been refining most carefully. Sarah Vale was Cassius's cousin. She was perhaps 30, dark-haired, carrying the Vale Nation spice-worm signature strongly. She looked at Harry with an expression that contained several competing things. She stood in the doorway. He's going to fight well, she said. No preamble. He spent 30 years on this. Harry lowered the practice focus. I know, he said. He's not cruel, she said. Whatever you think he's done. I don't think he's cruel, Harry said. I think he loves his daughter and he loves his nation and he's convinced himself that's sufficient justification for everything he's chosen. Sarah looked at him. And you think that's wrong? I think justification is the story you tell yourself, Harry said. What matters is the consequence of the choice. He met her eyes. 7 null stones in Meridian's living magic network. 2 years of slow damage to communities that had nothing to do with the question of who sits on the throne. Whatever his reasons, those people's water, their harvests, their magical stability, that was the actual consequence. Sarah was quiet for a long time. He doesn't know about the null stones, she said. Harry was very still. I can't prove it, she said. And I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm telling you because, she stopped. She had the expression of someone doing something difficult. Because if you win the trial, and you probably will, you're going to be his sovereign for the rest of his life and I need you to be sovereign over all of Vale Nation. Not just the parts that agreed with you. She paused. He's a good man who is wrong about this specific thing. And someone used that wrongness. She looked at him directly. The right question is who? Harry looked at her for a long moment. That's what Oat was saying, he said. Sarah's eyes moved slightly. She hadn't known Oat had come. Yes, she said. I'm paying attention, Harry said. I promise you I'm paying attention to the right question. She nodded. Once. Then she turned and walked out and Harry stood in the training hall and let what she'd said move through him and thought about a man with a daughter and a genuine belief being used as a vehicle by someone who had entirely different interests, and felt something that wasn't quite anger but was related to it, the specific feeling that came when something complicated had been deliberately made into something simple for someone else's benefit. He reached out through the throne connection and felt all 14 nations. Felt Meridian, steadily recovering. Felt Vale, dense and old and carrying the weight of what was coming. Felt the other 12, their signatures varied and constant, the living magic running more freely now than it had before the investiture, the improvement measurable week on week. 2 days until the trial. He had paid attention. He had prepared. He was ready in all the ways he could be ready. He went to find Gabrielle, because she would have food and something interesting to say about Pierre, and because the day before the trial was exactly the right time for an hour of completely irrelevant information about a falcon named Pierre. Chapter 6, The Sovereign Speaks. The morning of the trial by sky arrived the way significant mornings tended to, without fanfare, just light coming in through the window at the ordinary time, the Camargue birds doing their ordinary work, the court breathing its slow breath. Harry was awake before the light. He'd slept well, which he'd stopped being surprised about. His body had apparently decided that this place was safe in some foundational way that Privet Drive had never been, and responded accordingly regardless of what his mind was engaged with. He lay in the quiet for a few minutes and felt all 14 directions, the way he did every morning now, the way some people checked the weather. All present. Meridian still recovering but stable. Veil dense and awake, he could feel something different in it this morning, a quality of attention, like a room full of people who had stopped talking. They were watching. All of Veil Nation was facing this direction. He got up. He washed his face. He went to the window and looked at the sky, which was clear, the specific clear of a high-pressure day with good visibility to the horizon. Good conditions. The kind of sky you wanted for what was coming. There was a knock at his door. "Come in," he said. It was Gabrielle. She was carrying a plate with bread and fruit and a hard-boiled egg, and she had the expression of a child who has been given a specific task and is taking it seriously. She set the plate on his desk. "Maman says you have to eat before anything else," she said. "Tell Maman I was going to eat," Harry said. "I'll tell her you did eat," Gabrielle said, with the pragmatic distinction of someone who understood the difference between reporting and relaying. She sat down on the window seat and watched him eat with the frank observation she applied to most things. "Are you nervous?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always thought about her questions honestly because she'd earned that. "A little," he said. "But it's the useful kind. The kind that makes you faster," Gabrielle said. He looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "Papa talks about fencing," she said. "He says the good competitors are nervous before a match and the ones who aren't nervous are either very bad or about to lose." She paused. "Are you very bad?" "No," Harry said. "Then you're going to be faster," she said, with complete logical satisfaction. He finished the bread. He looked at her, at this 8-year-old who had appointed herself his equilibrium guardian and done the job with total commitment and zero sentimentality. "Thank you," he said. "For the past 30 days. Gabrielle looked at him with the enormous blue eyes. "I didn't do anything," she said. "Yes you did," he said. "You don't know what, but you did." She thought about this with genuine seriousness. "Pierre helped too," she said finally. "Pierre definitely helped," Harry agreed. She stood up, collected the empty plate, and moved to the door with the purpose of someone who has completed her assignment and is moving to the next. At the door she stopped. She turned around. The angelic composure wavered for exactly 2 seconds and underneath it was something that was simply an 8-year-old who had been watching someone she'd decided to care about prepare for something genuinely dangerous. Then she got the composure back. "Win," she said. Firmly. And left. Harry stood by the window for a moment. Then he put on the gold robes. The court had been filling since before dawn. The trial by sky required all 14 nations to be represented. Representatives had been arriving for a week. Harry had felt the court expanding around them, its population density increasing, the quality of attention in the air thickening towards something collective. Every household head, every senior delegation member, every observer who could get here had come. Therian had managed the logistics with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this in theory for 30 years and was deeply relieved to finally have something concrete to organize. The trial would happen above the court's central towers. The witnesses would be on the grounds, every available surface, the terraces and the training ground and the spaces between buildings and the hillsides around the court, which had been opened for the purpose. Some kind of amplification charm on the air, Apollon had supervised the setup, would ensure that everything visible in the sky above was also visible from ground level, translated into viewable scale. Harry stood on the central tower's upper platform, accessible, like everything in this building, by stepping into the intention of going there, and looked at the assembled court below. From up here it was a sea of people. He'd never been looked at by this many people at once. He found it less strange than he'd expected. They were looking up at the platform, not at him specifically, at the event. At what was about to happen. Cassius Vale arrived by the east route, which Harry could feel before he saw him, the approach of someone whose magical signature was very large and absolutely certain of itself. He came with 2 seconds, no more, the minimum attendance the trial protocol required. He was tall, dark, perhaps 40, built with the specific combination of breadth and control that suggested someone who had spent decades in physical and magical discipline. He wore Vale Nation colors, deep amber and black, and he moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who had been walking toward this moment for a long time and found the arrival perfectly natural. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. Cassius Vale had the eyes of a man who had thought deeply about something he was completely wrong about. Harry recognized that particular quality. It was more complicated than malice and more difficult to argue with. Sovereign, Cassius said. Formal, precise, the correct address. Cassius Vale, Harry said. Thank you for coming. Something moved in Cassius's expression, not what he'd expected. You're thanking me. I asked you to come and talk to me before invoking the trial, Harry said. You chose not to. That's your right. But the invitation was genuine, so yes, thank you for coming. Cassius studied him. You're 10, he said. 29 days ago you all would have said something similar, Harry said. It stopped being the most important thing about me fairly quickly. Cassius was quiet. He was doing the same thing Drax had done in the small room, the real assessment, underneath the prepared position. He looked at Harry with the focused attention of a warrior evaluating something before committing to a course. Then he looked away, at the sky. The trial proceeds, he said. Yes, Harry said. It does. The Grand Matriarch's voice came from the amplification charm. She was below, at the center of the court, conducting the formal opening. Harry heard her speaking the ancient Veela language of ceremony, felt the living magic of the court respond to the words, felt the trial's formal structure settle over the proceedings like a frame around a picture. The first sky was beginning. Seraphina's amplified voice described the stage for the assembled witnesses. The sovereign and the challenger would each demonstrate the scope of their magical range and control in open sky. No combat. No contact. Pure demonstration. The witnesses would observe and the trial would record both performances. Cassius went first, because he was the challenger, and the tradition gave the challenger precedence in the demonstration stage. He stepped to the edge of the platform. What happened next was extraordinary. Harry had known it would be. Fleur had described his capabilities in the training sessions and Harry was good at translating description into expectation, but description and the actual thing were different. The way reading about weather was different from standing in it. Cassius extended his hands and the sky above the court responded. Weather, Fleur had said. He controls weather directly. The clouds that had been at the edge of the horizon moved, not drifted, moved, with clear intentional velocity, and gathered above the court in a formation that was organized by will rather than atmospheric dynamics. Lightning happened inside the clouds, without striking, illuminating them from within in controlled pulses. Then the wind, a column of air spinning from the cloud base downward, controlled, not destructive but demonstrating the capacity for destruction with the specific precision of someone showing you where the line is. The wind column held for 30 seconds, perfectly formed. The clouds dissipated cleanly. The sky went blue. The assembled court was very quiet. Cassius had done it without apparent effort. He stepped back from the edge. Harry looked at the sky. He thought about what he'd prepared, about range and precision and brilliance versus easy, about what he'd said to Fleur on the terrace. He thought about all 14 directions. About the nullstones in Meridian's southwest circuit and what the court had felt like running through all of them at once. About the golden bowl in the Dursleys' sitting room. About a woman with dark hair and green eyes in a photograph he carried everywhere. He stepped to the edge. He reached for all 14. The sky went gold first, the same shift he'd done on the eastern terrace, but larger, intentional, the full scope of it spreading from the court outward to the horizon in every direction, the quality of light transforming across the entire visible world as 14 nations of living magic moved through the air at his direction. The witnesses below would have seen it as a warm flood of light, like a second sunrise with the wrong color. He held that as background. The foundation. Then he worked on top of it. He pulled moisture from the mountain air, not Cassius's weather control, something different, using thermodynamics the way he'd studied them, lifting and shaping, and he made something in the sky above the court. Not clouds. Not lightning. He made a structure in the air itself, made of temperature differential and pressure and the living magic of the nations, something that was simultaneously atmosphere and magic and both at once, a column of luminous air that rose from the platform to the height of 100 meters and held there, steady and blazing, turning slowly, containing within it the distinct signatures of all 14 nations interweaving like voices in a chord. He let the witnesses see it. Let them feel it, because the living magic in the column was strong enough to be felt at ground level, warmth and specific presence, the quality of something recognized. Then he expanded it. Not just above the court. Outward, in 14 directions. A thin line of living magic charged air extending from the column in each of the 14 directions of the nations, covering the whole map of what was his, running out to each boundary and touching each of them and coming back, a pulse through the entire network that every person in every nation who was attuned to the living magic would feel simultaneously. An affirmation that the throne was seated and the sovereign was present in everything that was the Aureate bloodline's promise to. 14 nations was awake and functioning. He held it for 60 seconds. Exactly. Then he released it. Clean. All at once. The column dissolved into ordinary air. The 14 lines folded back. The gold light faded from the horizon. The sky went back to Camargue blue with the bright specific clarity of a high-pressure morning. The assembled court was very, very quiet. Then someone, somewhere in the thousands of witnesses below, started making a sound. It spread quickly, not quite applause, something older than applause, a sound that was part response and part recognition, the sound communities made when something they'd been waiting for arrived. Harry stepped back from the edge. He looked at Cassius Vale. Cassius was looking at the sky where the column had been. His expression had done something Harry hadn't expected, not defeat, not anger. Something that was, genuinely, the expression of a man watching something and updating his understanding of it. A warrior's assessment, recalibrating in real time. He looked at Harry. "You reached all 14, he said. "Yes," Harry said. "From one point." "Yes." Cassius was quiet. The sound from below was still moving through the court. The trial protocol moved to the second sky without pause, the amplified announcement from Seraphina below, the formal shift of stage, the witnesses below resettling into a different kind of attention. Harry felt the change in the quality of sound from the crowd. More still. More serious. The second sky was combat. They went up simultaneously. That was the protocol, both participants ascending at the same time, the moment of ascent marking the beginning of the stage. Harry had thought a great deal about ascending. He was a wizard. Wizards flew on brooms, or with specific charms, or, there was a third option, which Apollon had mentioned and which she'd said was theoretical for a half-blood heir but which Harry had been quietly testing for the last 2 weeks in the early mornings before anyone else was in the training hall, hovering 3 inches off the floor, then a foot, then practicing the full intention of sustained altitude without assistance. He stepped off the edge of the platform and flew. Not broom flying. Not charm-sustained hovering. The Veela flight that Fleur had described, sustained by the living magic itself, the sovereign connection carrying him as it carried everything else in the network, the air around him simply deciding, under his direction, that he should be higher than he was. He went from the platform to 50 meters altitude in under 2 seconds and the wind hit him and he leaned into it and found, in the finding, that his body knew how to do this in a way his mind hadn't been sure of until the moment he was doing it. Cassius was beside him at altitude, the full Veela form expressed, Not a dramatic transformation but a particular quality of presence amplified until it was a physically visible thing, the Veela power wearing his skin like weather wore a landscape. He was larger in this form, or seemed larger, the way a fire seemed larger than its actual boundary. They looked at each other in the open sky above the Aureate court, and 30 meters below them thousands of people were watching, and Harry felt very awake and very present and not remotely afraid, and he thought, good. Cassius moved first. The lightning was fast and specifically targeted, not a display now but an application, aimed with the precision of 30 years of practice, and Harry felt it coming in the half-second before it arrived and moved, not dodged, moved, the displacement instinct from the Surrey rooftop at age 8 translating to altitude and expressing as a full 30-meter lateral shift in under a second. The lightning hit empty air. Harry pushed back, not lightning, not weather, he was working in his own vocabulary. He reached into the living magic network and pulled, through the sovereign connection, a focused charge through the specific nodes nearest to Cassius Vale's position, and directed it. The air around Cassius went dense, pressure-loaded, the kind of atmospheric condition that was disorienting and limiting rather than directly harmful, combat without cruelty, which was his instinct and which he decided to honor because this wasn't execution, it was a trial. Cassius broke through it. Strong enough to push through, which Harry had expected. The Veela form's amplification was real, he was significantly more powerful in full expression than Harry had counted on even after Fleur's description. He came back with wind shear, a horizontal blade of moving air aimed at Harry's altitude, and Harry had to use both thermal compensation and a direct living magic push to stay level. It was difficult. Not impossible, but difficult in the specific way that told him Cassius was genuinely excellent at this and had spent 30 years developing it, and the trial by Sky was not a foregone conclusion on the basis of the first Sky performance. He found that clarifying. He'd been a little concerned it would be too easy. They traded for 6 minutes, the crowd below completely silent in that stretched way that crowds went silent at genuinely close contests. Cassius's lightning Harry moved around or absorbed through the network. Harry's atmospheric pressure work Cassius pushed through. Neither was landing the kind of hit that would force a concession. Harry thought. Cassius was fighting in the Veela combat tradition, he'd studied it, he knew the patterns. Power, application, sustained assault, attrition. It was effective because it was practiced to the level of reflex. Reflexes were fast but they were also predictable once you knew the logic underneath them. Harry stopped responding to the lightning. He let Cassius think he was pulling back, resetting, and he used those 3 seconds to reach into the living magic network in a specific way, not as a weapon, not as a defense. As a resonance. He found the frequency of the Veela full-form expression, the specific magical signature that Cassius was running at full amplitude, and he matched it. Not overpowered it. Matched it, exactly, the way you matched a tuning fork by striking the right note. Cassius felt it immediately. He had to, it was his own frequency, reflected back at him from outside, and the dissonance of that, of something external running at your own precise frequency, was deeply disorienting to a magical working. His next lightning strike went wide. His altitude wobbled. Harry pressed the resonance stronger. Cassius held for 30 seconds. He was strong enough, disciplined enough, that 30 seconds was real, another person would have lost altitude immediately. But the resonance was not something physical strength could overcome because it wasn't physical, it was magical interference at the most specific level, and after 30 seconds Cassius Vale's altitude dropped 4 meters. In trial protocol, an involuntary altitude loss of more than 3 meters was a significant concession point. Harry released the resonance. Cassius leveled. He was breathing harder. He looked at Harry across 30 meters of open sky, and his expression had done the same thing it had done after the first Sky demonstration, the same recalibration, the same warrior's reassessment, but deeper now, the kind of reassessment that came from something touching the foundations of a position rather than its surface. Again, Cassius said. His voice carried on the mountain air. Yes, Harry said. And then, but tell me something first. Cassius stared at him. In the middle of the trial, you invoked it, Harry said. You can suspend stage transitions if both participants consent. I'm consenting. Do you? A long pause. Below, the crowd had the quality of thousands of people trying not to breathe. What do you want to ask? Cassius said. Who gave you the family mark to put on the null stones? Harry said. Or who placed the null stones and made sure you'd be blamed if anyone found them? The sky was completely still. Cassius's expression did something Harry had not predicted and could not have predicted. It went through confusion, real confusion, the kind that wasn't performance. What null stones? He said. Harry looked at him. What null stones? Cassius said again, and his voice had shifted, the combat quality stripped out of it, replaced by something that was raw. What are you talking about? Harry thought about Sarah Vale's face when she'd said he doesn't know. Thought about Counselor Oates' careful the evidence is not simple. Thought about the letter that was simultaneously sophisticated legal argument and the kind of object someone careful would never attach an obvious family mark to. 7 null stones, Harry said. Buried in Meridian's southwest circuit on the Vale side of the border. Draining the living magic network for 2 years. Marked with the Vale-Casser family sigil. Cassius Vale's expression went through several things. Confusion became something sharper. Then something colder. Then something that was fury held under the surface with what was clearly great effort. The Vale-Casser sigil, he said. Yes. That family branch, Cassius said with a flatness to his voice that suggested the words were very specifically chosen, has not been in contact with my household in 15 years. I know, Harry said. That's why I'm asking. A silence. The whole sky was quiet around them, and 30 meters below the surface of the crowd was completely still, thousands of people holding something suspended. Someone placed those stones and used a mark connected to me, Cassius said slowly. Not a question. Processing. Someone who wanted the trial to happen, Harry said. And wanted the context around it to be complicated enough that I couldn't cleanly resolve it before the trial date. So we'd fight before I could present you with clear evidence. Cassius looked at the sky. Then back at Harry. You went to Meridian. 3 weeks ago. I removed the null stones and repaired the anchor points. Harry paused. Drax knows. The council knows. The physical evidence is in the court's custody. I have been waiting to discuss it with you directly. Cassius Vale was very still in the sky. The wind moved around him with the quality of moving around something that had stopped. You could have used this in the council, he said. Before the trial. Made the case. Painted me as, the evidence doesn't prove you placed them, Harry said. And you're not someone who would place null stones and then file a sophisticated legal challenge drawing attention to yourself. The two things don't fit the same person. He paused. Someone who wanted me occupied with the trial instead of investigating the living magic damage used you. And your genuine belief. Harry looked at him steadily. You are wrong about the throne. But you're not dishonest, and I don't think you're cruel, and whoever did this was using your integrity against you. The silence stretched. Below, the crowd had understood that something had changed in the sky, though not specifically what. The quality of the engagement above them was different, not combat anymore, and the amplification carried voices but not meaning across the altitude gap. Cassius Vale looked at Harry for a long time. He looked like a man taking apart an argument he'd built carefully over 3 years and finding that the foundation had been interfered with. The Vale-Casser family, he said. My uncle's branch. There has been movement in that quarter. Politically. For the last several years. Toward interests I had not closely examined because we were estranged. He said the last word with the specific emphasis of a man understanding that an estrangement had been useful to someone. I need to know what interests, Harry said. Cassius looked at the court below. At the thousands of witnesses. At the trial in progress, stage 2 suspended by mutual consent in open sky above the assembled nations. Then he looked at Harry with an expression that had shed everything performative, the warrior's confidence, the challenger's posture, and was simply a man with a daughter and a nation and a conviction that had been operating, it appeared, inside someone else's plan. Humans, Cassius said. Outside interests. People who trade in magical resources available through nation boundaries, specifically Meridian's southern boundary, which is a significant transit point for deep earth materials that only exist within Veela territorial magic. If Meridian's network degrades past a threshold, the territorial magic collapses and the boundary becomes open. He paused. My uncle's branch has been brokered by those interests. I did not know. I did not look. He said the last 4 words with the weight of someone beginning to understand the full shape of their own mistake. Harry breathed. There it was. Not blood supremacy politics using Cassius. Commerce. Resource extraction using blood supremacy politics as a cover story, as a distraction, as a sovereignty dispute that kept the throne focused on a trial instead of an investigation. I need names, Harry said. I'll give them to you, Cassius said. Everything I know. He paused. After what? Cassius looked at him. The trial is still in progress, he said. I invoked it formally. It can only end in concession or the speaking. A pause. I'm not going to concede. Harry looked at him. You still want to fight? I challenged the sovereignty, Cassius said. I was wrong about some of my reasons. I was not wrong that the throne needed someone capable of holding it. And he stopped. Breathed. I need the nations to see what sits on that throne. Not because I expect to win anymore. Because they need to see it. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Something about the honesty of it, the complicated, stubborn, proud honesty of a man who had been wrong and knew it and was still standing in the sky, was something Harry respected in a way he hadn't expected to. All right, Harry said. Let's finish it. Cassius attacked. He came with everything, the full expression of 30 years of Veela combat training, weather and lightning and wind and the amplified power of the full form, the kind of assault that was not holding anything back because he was not holding anything back. It was, in its way, a gift. The real thing, the full measure of what Cassius Veil was, given without reservation. Harry met it. He didn't try to match power with power, that was not his vocabulary. He worked the way he always worked, with the particular clarity of someone who understood the architecture of a problem. He used the resonance technique he developed, yes, but he also did something he hadn't done yet, he dropped into the full depth of the sovereign connection, deeper than he'd gone in combat, and ran the 14 nations through himself not as a weapon but as a structure. He became, in those 30 seconds, genuinely the thing the blood test had confirmed, not a boy demonstrating power but the actual sovereign connection, the living magic of the Aureate Throne at full presence. Cassius's assault ran into that and dissipated. Not blocked. Not countered. Absorbed, the way a wave dissipated against something deeper than itself. Cassius's altitude dropped. 7 meters. Then 12. He leveled. He was breathing hard. He looked up at Harry with those complicated eyes, and then he looked at the court below, and he did something that was clearly costly, his hands moved in a specific formal gesture, downward and open, the palms facing the witnesses. Concession. The crowd below registered it before the amplification announced it, that wave of sound, the collective exhalation of thousands of people, the surge of reaction. Therian's voice came over the amplification, the challenger concedes. The trial by sky is concluded. The sovereignty is affirmed. Harry descended. He didn't rush, let it be slow, let the witnesses below see it. When he landed on the platform Cassius was already there, having dropped more quickly. He was composed. The full-form expression had receded. He was simply himself, standing in his nation's colors on the platform of the Aureate court. He looked at Harry. The names, Harry said. As soon as we're done here. Yes, Cassius said. And then, with the specific difficulty of a man for whom this cost something real, the throne chose correctly. Harry looked at him. I know you believe that now, he said. But I also know you believed what you believed before. I'm going to need you to help me make the future your daughter can live in. Both of us. Not as opponents. Cassius was quiet. What are you asking? I'm asking you to come back to this court in a week, Harry said. When I've investigated the Veil-Casser connection and the external interests. I want you at the table when we figure out what to do about it. You know those interests better than I do. And you have standing in Veil Nation that I don't have yet. Cassius looked at him for a long moment. Whatever he was recalibrating toward, he finished the journey and arrived. A week, he said. A week, Harry said. Cassius descended from the platform. Below, the crowd was not silent anymore, the post-trial noise was enormous, thousands of people in the particular state of having witnessed something that exceeded expectation, a quality of collective energy that Harry could feel through the throne connection as a warmth. He stood on the platform alone for a moment and looked at the Camargue sky, which was still the specific clear blue of the high-pressure morning. Then he looked down and found, in the crowd, a specific face. Gabrielle, standing with Apollon, looking straight up at him with the expression that was the real one, the one under the composure, the 8-year-old's pure uncomplicated feeling that she was extremely bad at hiding from him and had been since approximately day 3. He raised one hand. Just that. She waved back. Very hard. With both arms. He came down. The afternoon was people. Many people, in the formal sequence the trial's conclusion required, each nation's representative, each household head, the 9 counselors in session, the formal recording of the result into the permanent accord record. Harry moved through it with Therion coordinating and Fleur beside him and Apollon periodically appearing with food and a look that meant eat this right now. He ate. Renaud approached him after the formal session. He had the look he'd had after the water rights vote, the specific expression of a man with precise standards arriving at a conclusion that met them. The resonance technique, he said. In the second stage. Yes, Harry said. I've read the historical records of the trial by Sky 12 times, Renaud said. That technique is not in any of them. No, Harry agreed. I developed it about 3 weeks ago. Renaud looked at him. You should have it properly documented, he said. It's now part of the historical record. I'll write it up, Harry said. Renaud nodded, with that precise deference. Walked away. Drax found him near the end of the afternoon on the eastern terrace, the place Harry went when he needed air and the court gave him a moment. He came and stood beside Harry at the rail and looked at the valley. Thank you, Drax said. For Meridian. The living magic is recovering, Harry said. It'll take months for the full restoration. But the drain is stopped. Yes, Drax said. Then, the Veil-Casser connection. The outside interests. That's going to become a formal investigation. Yes, Harry said. I'm meeting with Cassius next week. I need Meridian's cooperation with the border investigation, specifically documenting the transit points the outside interests have been using. You'll have it, Drax said. Not a political offer. Just a man saying a direct thing. They stood in the late afternoon light. The valley was doing the Amber Anrose transition that Harry had been watching every evening for 30 days and had not gotten tired of. I'm going to open the border transit question to the full council, Harry said. Officially. It'll become the primary agenda item for the next session. The outside interests have been operating in the gaps between nations, the fragmentation has been their cover, and the trial was supposed to extend that cover by keeping me focused elsewhere. He paused. I'm going to close the gaps. Drax was quiet. That's going to require cooperation between nations that have not historically cooperated well. I know, Harry said. That's what the throne is for. Drax made a sound that was somewhere between acknowledgement and a very restrained form of amusement. He left. Harry stayed on the terrace. Fleur appeared. She had 2 cups of something hot and handed one to him and stood beside him at the rail. She was wearing the same expression she'd had at the end of days when the work had been particularly heavy, not tired, not drained, but used up in the productive way, the way you felt after 6 hours of something that mattered. "Well," she said. "Well," Harry said. They drank. The valley continued doing what it was doing. "He conceded at 12 meters, Fleur said. "Yes. The record," she said, "for second sky concession altitude in a trial by sky is 15 meters. The challenger in the last documented trial." Harry looked at her. "Am I meant to be impressed by that?" "You're meant to understand that 12 meters for someone of Cassius Vale's capability is an honest number," Fleur said. "He didn't gift it. He genuinely couldn't hold above 12. Harry thought about the 30 seconds of full sovereign connection, the living magic of 14 nations as a structure rather than a weapon. "No," he said. "He couldn't." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "The resonance technique," she said. "You didn't tell me about that specifically." "I was working it out," he said. "I wasn't sure it would function in actual combat conditions until it did." She looked at him. "You tested it for the first time in the trial." "The training hall tests were adjacent," he said. "Harry." She said his name with a specific quality that he'd learned to identify as Fleur at the edge of being genuinely annoyed rather than performatively annoyed, which was a real distinction. Could have what?" he said. "Practice the exact technique in advance." "On what?" "There's nobody else in this court who can sustain a full Veela combat form for me to test resonance interference against." She was quiet. "Then, that's annoyingly correct." "I know," he said. He looked at the valley. "I was careful. I had fallback approaches if the resonance failed. The atmospheric pressure work was effective enough to hold the stage if I needed to rely on it." Fleur drank her tea. She was quiet for a moment in the specific quality of Fleur's silence that was not the absence of something but the presence of something she was choosing how to say. He waited. "You were brilliant today," she said finally. Like she'd decided that the accurate thing was worth saying even if saying it cost her something. "The first sky especially. All 14 nations. I felt it." She paused. Everyone felt it. Harry looked at her sideways. "Thank you." "Don't make it strange," she said. "I'm not making it strange," he said. "Good," she said. And then, in the Fleur way that meant she was done with the emotional register and moving on before it could become a whole thing, the Dumbledore letter. "You said after the trial." "Yes," Harry said. "The trial was after. Are you going to write back?" "I already did," he said. "I said yes before the trial." Fleur looked at him. "You told him to come after." "Yes." "So he's coming." "Probably soon," Harry said. He'll have been watching this. He watches everything carefully and he acts on what he sees and he's seen enough now." He looked at the valley. "I need to talk to him. He knew my mother. And he spent 11 years arranging a world around a specific outcome and I want to understand that outcome clearly before I decide how much of it is my problem and how much of it I can actually help with." "Voldemort," Fleur said. "Yes," Harry said. "Among other things." He paused. "The sovereignty doesn't change what I'm connected to. The prophecy, whatever it is, the reason I survived, that's still there. I just have a different set of resources now than I would have had if I'd gone to Hogwarts at 11 and spent 7 years being prepared for whatever Dumbledore has in mind." "Resources," Fleur said. 14 nations, Harry said. "The throne. You." He said the last word simply, without particular weight but also without deflecting it. "I'm not doing this alone. I never was, once I left Privet Drive." Fleur looked at the valley. Her face was doing the thing it did, the temperature changing under the surface, the things she managed carefully and less successfully around him than around anyone else, which he suspected she found irritating and which he found, in a specific and uncomplicated way, something worth protecting. "No," she said. "You're not." They stood in the quiet and the light moved and the valley went from rose to the first edge of purple. Dumbledore arrived 3 days later. Harry had known he was coming before the gate guard sent word. He could feel something approaching the court that was large and attentive and very old, the way you could feel a storm before it arrived by the quality of the air. He was in the throne room when Therian informed him officially, and he said, "Show him in, please." "In here." Albus Dumbledore walked into the throne room of the Aureate court on an ordinary Tuesday morning and Harry had not entirely known what to expect, and what walked in was both more and less than the accumulated image of a man described through 10 years of occasional overheard conversations about the greatest wizard alive. He was tall, white-haired, wearing robes that managed to be simultaneously eccentric and clearly expensive, and he had the eyes that everyone always mentioned, blue, very bright, carrying an intelligence that was immediately visible and beneath it something more complex, something that had been carrying something heavy for a long time. He looked at the throne room. He looked at the counselors in their seats and the household heads in observer positions and Fleur to the right of the throne and Apollon near the front. He looked at Harry, sitting in the throne in the gold robes. He stopped walking. He looked at Harry for a moment with an expression that moved through several things quickly: recognition, something that was grief-adjacent but not quite grief, something that was very specifically not guilt even though it perhaps should have been, and something underneath all of those that was, Harry thought, genuine. Then Albus Dumbledore inclined his head, not a bow, but a clear, deliberate, specific acknowledgement. "Harry," he said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." A chair had been placed for him. He sat. He looked around the throne room with the genuine attentive interest of someone who was seeing something they'd known about but not encountered. Then he looked back at Harry. "You look like your mother," he said. "Around the eyes." Harry let that land properly before responding. "I know," he said. "I have a photograph." Dumbledore's expression did the something complex thing. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose you do." A pause. "I owe you an apology, Harry." Harry looked at him. "The Dursleys," Dumbledore said. "I knew what they were. I convinced myself that the blood protection was sufficient justification. That the technical necessity outweighed." He stopped. He was a man who had very good words for almost everything and who was, at this moment, being precise at the expense of fluency because he was trying to be honest rather than eloquent. "I was wrong," he said. "Simply and entirely wrong. And I'm sorry." Harry absorbed this. He'd thought about what he wanted to say when this moment came, during the 30 days of trial preparation, in the margins of everything else. He'd decided on honesty over performance and the moment was here. "I believe you," he said. "And I accept it." He paused. "But the apology is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it. I need to understand what you were trying to do. The full picture. What you know about Voldemort, about the prophecy, about what you believe my role in that is. Everything." Dumbledore looked at him. "You're 10, he said, not unkindly. "You're not the first person to observe that this week," Harry said. "Would you like the answer I've been giving, or would you like a different one?" Something moved in Dumbledore's eyes. It was, Harry thought, the beginning of genuine amusement, and underneath it something warmer, the recognition of a mind meeting another mind that was worth taking seriously. "Please," Dumbledore said. "Give me the answer you've been giving." "My age is the least interesting thing about me," Harry said. "And people who focus on it tend to miss more important information." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, with a quality that Harry had not expected, honest, stripped of the performance of wisdom, "I have been telling myself a story about you for 10 years. About who you would be and what you would need and what path would lead to the outcome I believed was necessary." He looked at the throne room. I should have known the story was mine, not yours. Tell me the story, Harry said. All of it. I want to know what you were planning, because the parts of it that are real, the threat, the prophecy, whatever Voldemort is actually capable of, those are my problem too. I'm not walking away from them just because I have a throne. He paused. I have 14 nations. That's a resource, not an excuse. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. What are you proposing? Information, Harry said. Honest, complete, mutual. You tell me what you know. I'll tell you what I know. We figure out what requires cooperation and what can be handled independently. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not going to be managed, Professor. But I'm also not going to be an obstacle. If your goal and mine overlap, which I believe they do, then the question is whether we work together effectively or whether we work separately and waste time duplicating effort. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The throne room was completely still around him, the counselors, the household heads, Fleur to Harry's right, Apollon near the front, all of them watching an old man and a boy negotiate a future in the morning light of the Aureate court. The prophecy, Dumbledore said finally, states that a boy born as the 7th month dies, with the power the Dark Lord knows not, will be the one to vanquish him. He said it simply. No mysticism, no weight of delivery. Just the words. I believe that is you, Harry. I have believed it for 10 years. And I have spent 10 years, however imperfectly, trying to ensure you survived long enough for it to be possible. Harry let the words sit. Then, the power he knows not, he said. What do you think that is? Dumbledore looked at him carefully. I had a theory, he said. I'm beginning to think my theory was incomplete. Harry thought about 14 nations and the resonance technique and the living magic of the Aureate Throne and a nullstone going silent under the Sovereign Connections cord. Yes, he said. I think it probably was. A pause. Then Dumbledore said something Harry had not expected him to say, and said it with the specific quality of a man who has held something tightly for a very long time and is choosing, deliberately, to open his hands. Will you help me understand what I'm missing? Harry looked at him. He thought about what it had cost, for Dumbledore, who did not easily ask for help, to ask it here, in this room, in this throne. He thought about his mother's eyes in a photograph and a woman named Elara who had left a throne in France and gone to England and had children and her line had run forward through generations until it arrived here, at this morning, at this specific meeting. Yes, Harry said. And you'll help me understand what I need to know about Voldemort. All of it. Dumbledore inclined his head again, that specific, deliberate acknowledgement. All of it, he agreed. Good, Harry said. He glanced at Therian. We'll need the East Wing meeting room. And someone should send for lunch, this is going to take a while. Therian moved immediately. Apollon, near the front, did the thing where she suppressed a smile by directing it into her tea. Fleur, to Harry's right, stood straight and said nothing but had the expression she wore when something had resolved correctly. Harry stood from the throne. He stepped down from the dais and walked toward the door and Dumbledore rose and fell into step beside him and they walked out of the throne room together, old man and boy, and the court moved for them as it always did, corridors arranging into paths, distances negotiating themselves. Your court, Dumbledore said, looking at the walls as they moved. It responds to you. It responds to intent, Harry said. The court always has. He paused. That's the first thing you should know about it. Dumbledore looked at him with those bright eyes and the complexity underneath them. I expect, he said, with the beginning of something that was genuine warmth, there is a great deal I should know about it. Yes, Harry said. There is. We'll start from the beginning. They walked through the Aureate court, into the East Wing, into the morning. Outside, the Camargue Valley sat in its ordinary extraordinary light, the mountains doing what mountains did, the living magic of 14 nations moving through the earth like blood through a body that had found its heart again after a very long time without one. In the North Tower, Pierre the Falcon conducted his business in total indifference to the weight of history being negotiated 2 floors below him. Everything was, in the way that only beginnings could be, exactly as it should be.